Here, let me see that for a second. Mouse. Okay, I think, yeah, it should do.
Okay, having a quorum, I would like to call the Planning Commission meeting of April 22nd to order. Ms. Rodriguez, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Commissioner Jacobs. Here. Commissioner Jordan. Here. Commissioner Larson.
Here.
Commissioner Lodge. Commissioner Schwartz.
Here.
Commissioner Jostes.
Here.
Commissioner Bartlett.
Here. Okay, under preliminary matters, our first item will be review of our minutes, our draft minutes of April 8th, 2010. Does the commission have comments on those minutes? Go ahead. Go ahead, Ms. Jacobs, yes.
Regarding the minutes, I'm looking at page 3. In the middle where it says the commission encouraged the CVBA to have more outreach, et cetera, and then the next paragraph says it was suggested that the new coordinated review process, I'd like to strengthen from the word suggested to determined. It was determined that the new, can we determine something like that? I think we can. The new coordinated review process with the Montecito Commission shall be a courtesy review involving comments at the conceptual level, just to set that down very clearly.
Okay.
That's all.
Other comments? Oh,
Oh, here, you can.
Ms. Lodge, did you have comments? Or not?
Mr. Chair, I have a question, though, as a follow-up to Commissioner Jacobs' comments. Did you not also ask to obtain, if they exist, similar joint review processes with some of the other? So perhaps we could include that in the minutes. I think, Ms. Weiss, you were here for that meeting. Does that ring a bell to you, for you?
We requested that staff review similar memorandums of understanding or other processes used with the city of Goleta, for example, on the airport, or with the county in other areas if we have any written agreements. Ms. Weiss indicated that it was mostly informal, and but if there are any that are actually written down, I don't know, did you want to see what they look like? Or my intention in that comment was that that we not change the ground rules unfairly. That what's good enough for the city of Goleta is good enough for other folks too.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan, you had a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm thinking on page 2, item C1, the address on De La Vina is off by about 10 points, and it should be 825.
Great, thank you. I had noted that as well. Any others? Okay, I have a comment on the first page. The roll call is showing up twice. So it's redundant.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Double pay. Okay, any other comments on the minutes? Okay, do I have a motion for approval, please?
So move.
Second.
Second. Okay. So moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Cotto, any requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of ex-agenda items?
Yes, Chair Bartlett, item 5B, the US 101 Improvement Project update, that is being postponed till either June 3rd or June 10th.
Great. Thank you very much. Any announcements or appeals?
No.
At this point, I'll open public comment for any items not on today's agenda. If anyone cares to speak. Seeing no one come forward, I'll close public comment, and we will open with our first discussion item, which is the operating budget for the Community Development Department for the fiscal year 2011. And I believe Ms. Weiss will be doing the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Chair Bartlett and Planning Commissioners. This afternoon, I'll make the initial comments. Also with us today is Paul Casey, the Community Development Director, who can help with questions or discussion, as well as Sue Gray, the Community Development Department's lead budget staff. So the city's budget and financial plan for the fiscal year 2011 was released and filed with the City Council this Tuesday on April 22nd. The plan is available online, and I had given you all a heads up that that's where you might find it Tuesday afternoon. This is a short time following the release of the document, so we're also providing you with copies of information today that will be going over the budget message from Jim Armstrong with the various attachments regarding changes that are included within the budget, as well as an attachment looking at options. I have a PowerPoint presentation for you today where I'll be highlighting those components of the budget related to the Community Development Department and specifically the Planning Division. Also, a department summary. Again, we just handed out to you all a printed copy of the department summary. That is also focused on the Planning Division. There are other pages within our budget for the Redevelopment Agency and the Building and Safety Division, and I haven't provided those copies today. But again, all that information is available online. So briefly, just to begin, the budget message is always an important overview presented by the city administrator. And in this message, somewhat similar to last year, the overriding concern is that this has been a very difficult budget to prepare. We're once again preparing a one-year plan rather than the traditional two-year plan, which the city had done for many years. But given the economic difficulties in projecting and planning with the changing economy, we're with one more round here with a one-year budget. It is very difficult to predict the revenues that we can expect. The Finance Department, City Administrator, and Council have been having work sessions continually this year, ever since the fiscal year 2010 budget was released, to try to stay on track and yet respond accordingly as conditions change. So with the review of the budget for fiscal year 2011, we're actually still talking a bit about 2010. And looking at some of the changes in terms of the organization that are really cumulative over that two-year period. So those changes are fairly significant in terms of the city's personnel and services. And what we'd be anticipating with the 2011 financial plan and associated changes is what we're going to be talking with you all about today. In the message, he notes that we've had, as proposed within the recommended budget, a reduction of 41 positions, and combined with the 37 from the year prior, that's representing approximately 11% reduction in the city's workforce, FTEs, as I understand it. The budget, as I walk through it, and perhaps you've read in the message and heard in the community, is recommended to meet a good portion of the target of reduction that we need to plan for, but there are additional funds recommended here as options, and I'll certainly go over what our options are. Those options could be offset, as well as other changes in the budget, depending on the union bargaining unit negotiations. So I hope you all got a chance to look generally at that message. There's quite a bit of information in terms of the details on the budget approach, as well as, each fund within the city. So I've always found that whenever I'm reading the budget, you really do learn a lot about the city operations. And so I know you all have commented on that in the past as well. So when you get a chance, you can look at that. We are just preparing our budget presentation for the City Council. The Community Development Department will be presenting to the Council on May 5th, Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. I also have some information for you about the schedule as a whole. Of course, that's why we're here today. In fact, the City Council is holding hearings up at City Hall, and so we're here in the Gephardt room. This PowerPoint is a work in progress based on the release from Tuesday, and it's part of what we'll be preparing for the City Council on May 5th. So we like always to just say who are we and what are we talking about here in terms of the focus on the Community Development Department. We have the administration section, which is led with Paul Casey. Within that section, we also have the key support staff with Sue Gray here with the budget, as well as a graphic artist and executive secretary and accountant. So that's that section. There is an arts component that our department helps oversee jointly with the county, and that's a program that I won't be spending any time on, but we always like to note that this department does help manage and oversee arts-related programs. The planning division, of course, that's where we'll be focusing our time. There's a small economic development program within our department. Again, in the materials we've handed out to you, you'll note that it's really a small part of my time, the redevelopment agency director's time, and Paul Casey's time related to economic development. Housing and redevelopment, that division includes several different programs related to human services, housing, housing rehab loans, redevelopment agency itself, as well as the housing development program. In building and safety, there's the inspection and code enforcement. There's the archives and clerical services, as well as the counter and plan check. Today we'll be discussing in more detail the programs and staffing for the planning division, which includes the long-range planning and special studies, development review, zoning information and enforcement, design review and historic preservation, and the staff hearing officer environmental review and training. Here's a pie chart that is showing the overall department budget at $33.3 essentially $million, which is, again, department-wide. The general fund portion is approximately 31% of our department budget. There's, as I think you know, quite a bit of funding activity in the redevelopment agency section of the program. I just want to note that on this pie chart we're showing the general plan update. We did create a special fund for the general plan update back in 2005, and in prior years we tracked the funding, which was to support the contracts for consultants and an additional staff person. For this fiscal year, it's at zero. There are no additional funding, and that staff position is being eliminated. This is, again, the information that you saw in the org chart. So for the general fund portion, which is, again, approximately 31%, shown here at $8.9 million, I'm rounding. As I think you all know, the majority of the funding in our division, or in our department, is related to the salaries and benefits, 73%. We have reasonable, but on the small side, because they've been cut year after year lately, supplies and services within the planning division proposed for this budget year. Those supplies and services are down to the very lean level where, in fact, we'll be talking briefly about the stipends. That $50,000 usually was in that category. It's not there this time. And then these other ones are related to details that I can't tell you about, human services and other things that aren't really too much focused on planning. Here's just an overall picture that the general fund, is this general fund or the whole department? General fund appropriations for the last 2 fiscal years as well as this one we're planning for have been a downward trend, and it's approximately 5% reduction from fiscal year 2009. Here's a level of detail in terms of our revenues. And there's just one or two things on this chart that I'd like to point out for you to understand. And whenever we prepare our department's budget, we're given direction from the city administrator and finance. And that direction is a target. It's either a target reduction or it's a number that is, that first number is the general fund subsidy. What is the incoming funding that we can plan for? And in this case, that general fund subsidy has been on the downhill. So this budget started with a 4.1% reduction in the general fund subsidy for the department. I wanted to point out fees and service charges. We will be talking about our projections for fees and revenue, specifically the changes that we're recommending in the planning division, what we think we might see. Here under miscellaneous one-time, I just wanted to let you know that and I think we talked about this last year, I'll talk about it again, we are receiving some revenue from other departments. The planning division has been supported by the redevelopment agency for the preparation of our housing element. This last year we received $50,000 to work on the housing element, and then planned for 11. We're also looking at an additional $50,000 for the housing element. Some of the planners have been doing work for the Public Works Department, mostly in the Water Resources Division, and so what we're planning again for next year is $25,000 to have planner support in those departments. So those are seen here as a revenue. Okay, what is in our department recommended budget that we'll be highlighting here? Initially, we were given this target reduction, as I mentioned, of $1.1 million. You'll see in the bottom line what we're planning to right now is less than that. And that's just in recognition that this is a bit of a moving target. The city administrator wanted to propose a reasonable and appropriate budget for the council to consider, as well as recognizing that additional decisions will be necessary from the council. So what we've included in our department submittal is the $597,000 that are in the budget and additional options of $312,000. So here is a table, which again, I'm not sure if you've had a chance to look at the budget message, but this is an excerpt from the budget message in terms of what we are recommending within the Community Development Department's budget. We've seen a reduction in staff, and we could save money by reducing our workstations. So that was significant to actually come up with $11,000 there. The Planning Commission and other board and commission stipends at $50,000. We are looking to raise some of the planning fees, and we've projected that. I'll go into that a little bit more detail at approximately $65,000. We're going to talk about appeal fees, but they're really not a revenue generator. It's more of a procedural issue. Those public works assignments at $25,000 that I mentioned, the housing element for $50,000. So these are enhanced revenues. We did achieve a grant from the state regarding the climate action plan, so we have $35,000 there for staffing next year. This is a housing program administration with the homeless. Our graphic artist within our department is going to be helping other departments, and so they'll be paying for some of that time. We are eliminating one position from the Plan Santa Barbara team, and that was the one that we'd been planning for. It was an added position some time ago that we expected to be eliminating at about this time. It came a little earlier than anticipated, the project planner in Plan Santa Barbara. The community development directors, I think you all know, Paul Casey is now wearing two hats, the community development director as well as the assistant city administrator. And so there's a 50% savings that will accrue in our department based on his time at City Hall. And we're looking to eliminate a position in building and safety, a BIA, building inspector aide, eliminate our planning receptionist, a planning technician, and also there's a position shared within building and safety and public works that saves us half of that position. As I think you will have already heard, or you will hear, the focus on the recommended budget adjustments regarding staff was, where possible, and this was done extensively, eliminate vacant positions and make adjustments so city staff would not be displaced. Our project planner from the Plan Santa Barbara team, Peggy Burbank, has gone and taken a position as a redevelopment agency specialist. And so that's what number 10 represents. The BIA within the building division, they have somewhere for someone to move based on a vacancy. Our receptionist, it was another success story within planning division, moved on to public works. Stephanie was promoted to an engineering tech at the front counter. So that has been a vacant position. And then number 14 represents a planning technician, Ginny Howard, who's retiring. So that was our initial, and then our staff in building and safety, this is a current setup. We did this last year, and we're looking to continue that next year. So that represented just about $600,000 within the budget recommended. And then I'm briefly going to go through what all those changes mean. And this is very brief. Again, you'll see towards the end of this section, we talk a little bit about cumulatively again, what does all this mean? But here's a few brief comments on each change. So with the change in the desktop, there's no real impact. With the board and commission stipends, we have kept the council informed of the feedback we've had from the various boards and commissions. There really is mixed feelings among the board and commissions. Some say they didn't have it. It was a fairly new program to them, unlike the commission here. Others, we've made it very clear that this is a temporary measure. It's a suspension. We recognize that the financial amount it's meaningful, it's helpful, but also it's the meaning behind it. It's one way to recognize how much we do value the volunteers of time and effort of our board and commissions. So that's what we're looking at there for this year. Raising planning fees, we expected that there might be some concern, again, in the down economy. How does the government respond, and is this appropriate? And I've looked carefully at the fees and have a few areas that we are recommending a change, and then others that we would leave as is for this year. I will talk briefly in subsequent slides about an idea we have regarding changing the appeal fee and process for appeals. We're not expecting that to be a revenue generator, like I said. We are expecting it to be controversial. The public works assignments, that does impact us in that the planners aren't available to do the planning division work if they're spending, $25,000 worth of time supporting a public works project. Actually, in sometimes we're doing planning work for them. So it is a win-win situation. It depends a lot on which projects we can help them with. The RDA support, that $50,000 is clearly a positive impact to our program. Climate Action Plan is also a positive impact that we have that $35,000. The support to the housing and homeless programs, it's positive in terms of addressing one of the council's top priorities. It does have an effect in terms of people's time and assignments. The graphic designer, that person is very busy within our office meeting multiple demands, and now they'll also be working for other departments as well. So we'll feel that impact. Eliminating that project planner, the Plan Santa Barbara implementation and priority setting that we're hoping to begin at the end of this year and early next year will be affected not just by this position but by the city resources overall, and depending what our priorities are and how we're managing the review process. So we are anticipating that we won't be able to start everything all at once, and it'll be important to prioritize. The reduction of the community development director here does have some impact in terms of oversight on various department activities, particularly special projects, major projects. But Paul's here. He's here. It's just we have less of him. The building inspector aide, that will impact counter services and customer service. Also, again, even that building inspector aide does do some plan check work as well, and so that could be affected. Eliminating our planning receptionist, we're going to be going to an automated phone system, and that may be, we're expecting mixed responses from that. It'll be a change, and people may not like it at first, but we're also promoting direct access to our individual extensions. So we're trying to, do the best we can on that change. With the elimination of the planning receptionist, this actually represents now 2 positions down in our admin support group, one from last year and one here. So spreading the work from that person to the remaining admin staff is an impact. We're already working on it. We know it requires fewer people doing more things and doing them differently.
Ms. Lodge.
A question about the elimination of the receptionist. When people come upstairs,
Oh, yes.
members of the public, what will happen? I mean, that.
Thank you. Yes, we will continue to have reception services. We are actually working with the redevelopment agency staff. We're going to be having a general fund payment to support redevelopment staff to provide our reception services. So we will, when you come up the stairs or out of the elevator, there'll be 2 people sitting in the front desks where we have desks today, greeting people. Also, arranging for people to wait and get into meeting rooms and all the normal reception duties, as well as they'll be answering our phones. So if the phone tree leads you to a dead end or you want an operator, you'll be pressing 0 and you'll have reception staff. Yes. Yes, absolutely. It's just we don't have the position. We're going about it in a different way now. Thank you. That's something we should remember for future presentations because, what? No one's there. Okay. We are looking with the retirement we have, that position will be eliminated. And again, every position we have at this point, we're covering many different areas, but we see this loss affecting our zoning enforcement program, our customer service and how we staff at the counter, and then very specifically we're looking at a temporary change, hopefully, to the sign committee, and I'll go over that in a little bit more detail later. The building inspector, this is a continued effort, and again, losing half a person does affect some of their other enforcement work. Cumulatively, we say this all the time, and the list gets longer. Sometimes we're able to work on the list of special projects, but we really think that our ability to implement priority projects with Plan Santa Barbara, keep all the planning functions going, our special to-do list is going to be inactive, really, to a large degree. And that includes things presently like we had all wanted to create a new setback in commercial zones. The council wants us to re-examine the hedge ordinance. There's a new city program to collect transit occupancy tax for vacation rentals. There's a variety of things. There's special design districts and historic district work program. And so those, our ability to be honest with people about where we are on those projects and the expectations for how quickly they'll happen, that's what we usually talk about at our joint meetings with the council every 6 months. So you'll be hearing that story from me next year, at least twice, I think. And then again, overall, the development activity has slowed down in many respects, both at the Planning Commission and in the design review boards in certain areas. But as that picks up, we're anticipating, because it's not always one constant level of work, that there could end up being some delays in the development review process. And certainly as the economy does turn around and things start to build back up, we're concerned about the staffing level there. We are working on a package of ordinance amendments that are part of our recommended budget. And so one of the changes that we're recommending is to establish that the condominiums for sale, their zoning information report would become optional. I've had a number of meetings with the Santa Barbara Board of Realtors, and they would really like us to explore changing the way we do the zoning information reports across the board. But we fairly readily agreed that the value of the zoning information report for condominiums is fairly low, yet it actually takes time on their part as part of the transaction and our time. And so with the reduction in staff, we'd like to make that change. Now, people will still call for these zoning reports, but we do expect over time that we'll see fewer for the condominiums. Also, there's a number of changes within the zoning ordinance that we'd like to clarify. We're trying to do this relatively simple. Again, these changes might save time and money on everyone's part during a plan check process, or reduce the modifications, the need for modifications. Again, annually, as we look at what mods we've been granting, if a standard could change and make more sense and be acceptable, we have a few of those that we'd like to bring. They'll be coming through a public hearing. We're going to go to City Council to initiate the ordinance amendments following the adoption of the budget. Then we'll have a sense of, you know, what gets adopted and what we need to move forward with. Also within that package, I don't have a bullet there, but it would be amending the sign ordinance. And that amendment might either be within the code itself or a temporary ordinance, where what we've planned to do is temporarily suspend the sign committee as an entity itself, and instead go back to the way we used to do it a long time ago, which is that the sign permits are on the ABR or HLC agenda. We have seen approximately a 30% reduction in the number of items on agendas at the ABR and the HLC. And again, but last week, ABR went till 9 p.m. So it's a tough one to manage, but we've been working with members of the sign committee. What we'd like to do is we have volunteers, one committee member to work with HLC from the sign committee, Natalie Cope, one member, Bob Cunningham, to work with the ABR, and that they will be doing conforming sign review, which is something that we do now, and they would continue to provide that review. And then they would be sitting with the ABR or HLC on consent, where sign reviews are appropriate, the consent calendar. And for the few larger items that really need a full board review, we will be scheduling sign programs and larger items on the ABR and HLC. So I've had a fair amount of discussion with them about this. This will save us a whole extra meeting day and a whole meeting cycle of a separate agenda, two staff attending that meetings, and with the loss of the planning tech, we think that this is really a necessary temporary change. Also, we're really excited about updating some of our environmental review procedures, and we'll be holding some discussions with the Planning Commission about that soon as well. These changes are really part of just what we really need to be doing, going back to simpler times with smaller staff. We're not the same agency that we were in the late 90s, early 2000s, when we're adding review bodies and we're adding levels of review and staff. Those were good times in terms of really advances in customer service, coordination within various departments, and we want to hold on to those things, but in a new way with a smaller group. So in terms of the numbers of how we've become smaller, within the general fund portion of the department, again, there's additional staff in the redevelopment agency, but our general fund staffing for community development was 72 in fiscal year 09, and for this proposed plan, we're at 60. So that's a 12 position reduction, which is approximately 17%. at approximately 60 positions. That's similar to 1997, which was before we began the excellence in customer service and the land development team growth period. So we're really going back to a smaller group here. When you look at the special assignments that we have with Public Works and others in the department, the reduction is actually down to about 59 staff. In building and safety, that's been a 21% reduction. They had 28 people in 09, and proposed in this plan, they have 22. In the planning division, in 09, we had 40 positions, and for this plan, we're at 34. So that represents 15%. And again, back before the growth spurt, we had about 32, 33 positions in the planning division. So we're pretty close to that level. Okay, I just wanted to mention on the fees, because we always talk about that a little bit. What are we doing? The planning division has a number of fees and services that relate to our land development team, which is the coordinated, with Public Works and fire and building and such. So we have, as a land development team, discussed with the council and the commission and the community the amount of subsidy that the general fund provides for these development review processes and how much the fees for an applicant cover. Traditionally, the city has subsidized that process on the order of 80% or more. And we have had a policy direction from the council to move that subsidy down and recovery up. And so we've been shooting for a recovery of approximately 30% in some programs and up to 50% in others. I think it was a year or two ago that the council had said, look towards more recovery at the 50% level. And then we also have some services where we're close to the 100% recovery. The zoning information report, for example, has always been at approximately 100% recovery. Our plan check services are similar to building and safety, where we're looking to recover approximately 100%. And we do a few other services at the hourly level that are also at closer to 100%. So within the fee schedule, what we have found, of course, we have had feedback from the community that they're concerned that our fees are high and are we going to raise them. Well, the feedback I've had from the supervisor and design review is that he really thinks that his design review fees are just fine the way they are, so we're not going to raise them this fiscal year. But we did look to, where's my notes on this? I am looking to keep also the zoning plan check fees are unchanged. Building and safety aren't changing their plan check fees either at this time. The tentative map fees and the modification fees, we've been doing a lot of tentative maps and modifications, and the case planners and I, we feel that the fee is reasonable still at this point, so we're not looking to change those. I have done a little bit of a comparison, as we do every year, look at other agencies, and we're still, for the agencies that charge a set fee for certain planning reviews, we're in the higher range, along with some of the agencies that charge at a higher level. And then other agencies, either their process is more simplified, or again, their councils are subsidizing it as well. The fees that I am looking to change in this year are the environmental review fees. We want to go more towards, particularly for the EIRs and addendums and in-house staff work, more towards the hourly rate recovery there. So that would be a change. The pre-application review, that's something that is really valuable, and we think that there's some room for an addition there. So given that we're not raising all the fees, and given that it's hard to predict how much activity we're going to have, we think we're being a little conservative by budgeting only a 5% increase in revenues. And then based on something else in the budget, that ends up being really only a 2% increase. Here's the idea we have for appeal fees. Okay, again, I've looked at different agencies locally in California, and there are two general schools of approach on appeals. There's probably more, but I'm just going to generalize. One is a fairly low appeal fee. You see them in the range that we have here, currently at $395 or $200. And the thinking, I think, behind that is keep the process open and available and keep the fees low. These appeals may be coming from a neighbor, a community group, nonprofit type of thing, and so we want to keep the process accessible. Other agencies do charge more. The City of Goleta has a major appeal fee of $2,000, and there are other agencies in the state as well that Carpinteria is charging $1,260, quite a bit more, 3 times more than us. So anyway, and the County of Ventura also has a $2,000 fee. So we looked at what do we think our average cost is, how much time on the basics of an appeal, staff report preparation, council site visit time, and hearing time, just even some of the basic components, not all the give and take that goes on. It's approximately $9,000, the cost to the city to conduct an appeal hearing. So what we're thinking is let's establish a substantial deposit, $3,000 to file the appeal. And along with that appeal, you would have mandatory, we're calling it mandatory mediation. This is not well defined as of yet, what the involvement attorneys would be and all that type of thing. But the goal of the mediation is to resolve the differences resulting in withdrawal of the appeal, if possible, or refine what the issues are that really are of importance for the council to consider. We often see in appeals more or less the kitchen sink, and that takes an awful lot of time and focus, and so this process could, again, be helpful. Also, we're thinking, depending on the outcome of the appeal, other agencies do this. If the appellant prevails, perhaps they could be refunded up to 2/3, $2,000 back, and maintain a base appeal fee of $1,000, for example. Or if the outcome of the appeal is somewhat mixed for whatever reason, I was just thinking of dividing the $3,000 into thirds. You're either paying the full $3,000, receiving a $1,000 refund, or a $2,000 refund, and the base appeal fee would never go below $1,000. We're going to be discussing this with the Finance Committee next Tuesday. That'll be the first time that we get feedback from City Council members if they want to go here or not. But every time we present the budget at board and commission meetings and we discuss this matter in the community, the development community, we get feedback that people think it needs to be fixed in some way and that there's a concern. But again, there's a great interest and concern in keeping this process accessible, due process, and the council has traditionally kept the fee low. So I'm not sure where this is going to go from here or there on Tuesday. We'll see. Commissioner Larson had a question.
Real quick,
Yeah.
on the mandatory mediation, is there a fee proposed for that? Because that costs money.
Well,
Mediation's expensive.
no, that would be part of it.
Part of the deposit?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And again, how we define mediation, if that's limited to 2 meetings, for example, we don't want it to become ending up delaying extensively a process here. So that'll be an important piece of this if this goes forward. I'm sorry, this presentation is longer than I thought.
Yeah, your 15
Building and
minutes are
safety-
almost up.
I'm hoping that it's almost over. Building and safety aren't raising their fees. Okay. Yes, we are nearing the end. So as I've mentioned, there's the recommended budget, and then there are options. And depending on the negotiations and the whole council deliberation on priorities for the organization and where to make adjustments, each department was asked to propose additional options that Mr. Armstrong has presented. For our department, they're fairly substantial. We're looking at another project planner position. We're looking to have more support from the redevelopment agency, again, having our supervisor partially funded by the redevelopment agency for our admin support. We'd be looking at eliminating another planning tech, and then in building and safety, they'd be reducing another position as well. Those reductions are going to have impacts. At this point, with the loss of project planners, I see that affecting our CEQA expertise within the division, and once again, affecting our ability to, I mean, at this point, I would be saying, I really mean we're not going to be working on these special assignments. Coordination for the admin supervisor, I think that's something we could certainly work out. With the planning tech, by the time we're down this number of staff, remember we're at like 34, 35, and so these are 3 additional positions. That's going to have a rippling effect in terms of our counter services, customer service, development review, and in building and safety, the loss of the records tech is going to, you know, the support staff is down, and that they have a lot of functions there that could feel that. Okay, that's that last slide, but I actually had 1 or 2 other comments, sorry, quickly to comment on. We didn't present it in the presentation, but the P3 performance measures are part of the budget, and in the package we gave you here, we have a P3 program for our long-range planning, development review, zoning, design review, and I did just want to note a couple of highlights. When you look at the numbers that are in the P3 program, you can see our trend where the number of applications on your agendas have gone down, the number of applications in design review have gone down. So that's our last year and what we think next year trend is going to be. But it may only be 1 year, and you know it could start to change. But these numbers presented, well, in the department summary handout, the P3 programs for us begin with a letter G80. With long-range planning, development review, and I wasn't going to present all this data. I just wanted to call to your attention the performance measures that are included there, tracking from the years 09, this year 10, and next year for 2011. And if you have any questions or want to talk more about the P3 program. But we've tried to go back to basics in terms of what we're projecting our objectives are under the P3 program. So again, just a concluding comment that in terms of public discussion of the budget, what we typically do is we go to each board and commission. So we're here today. Next week we'll be at the Single Family Design Board and the Historic Landmarks Commission and Sign Committee, and then the following week at ABR, and then council presentation is on Wednesday, May 5th at 10 a.m. We gave you a handout of all the budget hearings that the council is holding. Our Finance Committee discussion regarding fees is next Tuesday, April 27th. I think they're meeting, are they starting at noon? They're starting at 11. Special meeting at 11 with the Finance Committee on Tuesday, and that's where we'll talk about fees. So I apologize, this presentation is, there's a lot to this, as you know, but that concludes.
Great. Well, we
staff
appreciate
comments.
your being thorough, so
Okay.
thank you. I would like to open public comment on this item if anybody is here to speak to the community development budget issues today. Seeing no one come forward, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the commission for questions and comments. Ms. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Betty, I was thinking about enforcement and enforcement cases. That's one of my thoughts, how we're going to handle that, especially signs right now. I mean, I understand it's hard economic times, but everywhere I see sign violations everywhere. And, losing the sign committee, we want to make sure we can still enforce. The other thing is I noticed we don't ever charge, as far as I know, a no-show fee for people who don't keep appointments, like with boards and commissions, and if they just don't come.
We do have one.
Oh, we do have one? Okay, fine.
Not for the Planning Commission, but that we do have it as
Anytime
part of
staff's
design review.
assembled
Yes.
for something that's going to cost you by the hour, it would be great to have a way to recover some of it. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Schwartz, I think I'm just going to come this direction since I don't have the lights in front of me to make it easier to follow.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Bartlett. Ms. Weiss, if you could put up one of your earliest slides that shows the redevelopment agency portion of the financial pie.
I think, is that the one?
Yes. So, and are we going to go to comments subsequently, following questions, or do you want them combined for today?
Why don't we do the questions first?
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to note 62%, and I'll come back with
Okay.
comments for you on that. Another question. Where do consultants' fees appear in the overviews that we've seen and that we see on the city's website? Is it sort of incorporated by department, or are they broken out separately?
For our, I'm not quite sure what you mean by consultants fees, but within the planning division, we have special supplies and services. And if we are going to hire a consultant to help us on a special planning program developing new guidelines for a historic district or something like that, those are funded as professional service contracts. We don't have any funds recommended in this fiscal year 2011 for professional service contracts. And typically, the planning division does not have large funding, with the exception, of course, of Plan Santa Barbara, which was a substantial contract. But it would occur within each division's line items of their budget, and usually under a title of professional service contracts. Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so that's lumped
So, like
into
here in
supplies
this
and
pie,
services, is that right?
When you look at what's our appropriation side of the budget, we have large line items to cover the staffing levels, and supplies and services within that. If there were to be any professional service contracts, that's where it would be. Supplies and services.
Okay, and will we be receiving a more detailed breakout within any of these categories to know that sort of thing? What percentage of our budget is being used for professional services or outsourced contract services?
Typically not.
Okay.
But if you are particularly interested, I could follow up.
Okay. Let me just review. Of the agencies or other, what I might call coastal municipalities, where you've looked at their fee structures and compared them to Santa Barbara's, do you recall which ones might be most comparable to ours?
I found that the San Luis Obispo, the city of San Luis Obispo, mirrored ours fairly closely. Locally, that isn't so much the case in terms of the county or Goleta, because they are more towards full cost recovery. Let's see, where else did I look here? The city of Ventura is also similar for us. They actually charge a fair amount for their design review, perhaps a little more than we do there. But their tentative maps and subdivisions are perhaps a little bit lower than ours. So City of Ventura was a little bit lower. The City of San Luis Obispo was right in our range. And then locally, we have more agencies that are full cost.
Okay. And lastly, has the city, or has community development in particular, utilized college interns to augment some of the needs where that could be conceptually, a more cost-effective way to augment personnel support, whether that's just during summer months or project-specific periods?
Yes, we have had student interns from time to time, and I think this would be a good time for that. We've had relationships with both UCSB programs, City College, and the San Luis Obispo programs. We've had folks from Cal Poly in the summer, and that's really nice, where they can stay a good amount of time. Whenever possible, if we can have someone, even stay on for 2 quarters or stay on past. These are unpaid volunteers, and we do make use of them. We've had some great interns with the Plan Santa Barbara project over the course of the years as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Larson, did you have any other questions?
No, I'm pretty good.
Okay.
Thanks.
Mr. Jostis.
Mr. Chair, I have comments, but I don't think I have any questions.
Okay,
at this
we'll
point.
try and be quick with the questions. Ms. Jacobs.
I have another one regarding zoning and zoning enforcement. Enforcement cases tend to be complaint-driven, right? So in the program performance measures, zoning and enforcement cases received, the actual number for 2009 was 541, but the proposal for 2011 is only 300, and there's similar kind of projections about citations and letters sent, and I'm wondering, since it's complaint-driven, how do you make those kinds of projections, saying we won't have as many by half?
Right. It is. It's not really a proposal. It is a projection in terms of what level we think it's going to be. Danny,
So
you
just think
started
there'll
this.
be that many fewer complaints?
I actually think it is variable, and it could be on the rise. I think we've generally projected at 300 as a constant, and then each year, whatever the number comes in at, we record it at where it came in. But I think some time ago we established 300 as a baseline number.
So
But
you
I
don't
think
get to
typically
300 and say, sorry, we can't take it.
no, but typically I think it comes in higher than the 300 has been my experience. And we have prioritized our response to enforcement. So out of the ones that come in, keeping track of warning letters and responding to the higher priority ones within so many days, we also keep track of that.
Okay, that's a big reduction projection. And then it looks like a lot of the staffing and money for the support of the general plan is going away. But we're not done with the general plan yet, so my question would be, what's going to happen in terms of staffing there? If we're not using consultants, if we're expecting to bring it in-house, and we're not even close to being done, what's going to happen with that?
Well, as far as the consultant contracts, we have a contract for completion of the EIR. So we're in the draft EIR stage, and that contract will carry us through to certification. The other support for public participation and the economics and all that, that pretty much ended last year. So we haven't had an expectation that other contract support was going to continue. That wasn't really funded as part of the program. We will have the remaining long-range planning staff, and depending on whether or not we go further into these options, that will gauge how much an impact that is on bringing Plan Santa Barbara General Plan to a completion step or a milestone. And then, as I've said, I think it will affect our ability to prioritize an implementation. But we are still projecting in this fiscal year to have the principal planner, and I think it's 3 to 4 planners also on the Plan Santa Barbara project. So there's a clear reduction of 1 and somewhere a little bit beyond 1 in terms of staff. And then they're just being folded into the rest of the Plan Santa Barbara, rest of the planning division budget. We don't have a special budget for them any longer.
Any longer?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Lodge. Okay. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Weiss, I was just curious in that list of fee categories you listed, whether all of them were listed as would affect my question, and that is, would there be any fees going up for victims of the various sets of fire losses?
No. The design review, most people who have been coming in for the rebuilds are going to the single family design board. Well, okay. If you go to the single-family design board and you're at the consent level, there really isn't a change recommended. We also didn't recommend a change to the modification. So many of those projects have been just at that level. But I've neglected to make one comment. The single-family design board, they asked that we increase the fee for projects over the 85% FAR. There's a special fee that if you are proposing over that, so that fee would go up if any of the homes or any new homes proposed are over 85% of the FAR.
Okay, thanks. Do you want me to start back the other way on comments?
Well, I think I've got a couple to add to the list.
Okay.
I'll just tag on to the last one. So if you go to single-family design board and then you get beat back below the 85%, do you get a refund then on your application? No.
No.
Okay.
It's the application paid at the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Going back to your notion about the appeal fees and so forth, now in the coastal zone, the appeals are free, so I'm assuming that there's no change there, correct?
That's correct.
Right. And also on the appeals, has there been any consideration for the application process for an appellant, which should, I think, be similar to what an applicant goes through to make sure that it's complete and valid, to weed it out before it even becomes one? I mean, has that sort of filter process been considered at all, or is it just fees?
Well, I think that filter and refinement is something that we would like to see done prior to going to council if the
Right.
appeal is going to move forward. The 10-day appeal period doesn't really allow for a lot of time.
Right.
But we do sometimes have contact with appellants leading up to the filing deadline, and sometimes we're able to resolve things, but that's a pretty short period of time.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, comments. Ms. Schwartz, shall we just start at your end again?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So let me back up and sort of the other side to some of my questions, Ms. Weiss. I would be interested to know at some point that's appropriate the percentage of professional services that are being used as a subset of supplies and services. I think that of the 14% of the budget.
There are none recommended for this fiscal year. No professional services.
For 2011,
Correct.
the department will use no outside
That's correct.
consultants.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I could show you what it's been in past years, but this year, none.
Well, I'm aware of the current fiscal
Okay.
year,
Okay.
and so that's what prompts my question and comment. Mandatory mediation. I'm very much in support of the concept. We'll have to see, as you said, how it gets defined and clarified. But I'd really, and to not make it overly cumbersome for either the city or the appellants or the applicants. But I would like to see a process where, and I may have mentioned this on the 825 De La Vina project, where we try to bring the conflicting parties together, perhaps not on a complete win-win. There may not be total mutual satisfaction, but in a way that gets to the heart or the crux of the disagreement, the opposition, before we take up more city resources and more public resources. So one of my thoughts is, it's really a question back to the department, is a 10-day appeal timeline the appropriate timeline? Perhaps with mediation that isn't sufficient. And I don't know if that's something the department is going to be looking at as you define and clarify the mandatory mediation process. I think that's it for now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Larson?
Thank you, Chair Bartlett. I think, first of all, I sympathize and feel your pain. And Ms. Gray, Paul, and Betty, and I know everybody that's had to participate in this process has felt it very personally, as well as professionally. And I've experienced myself in my own professional life the ups and downs of budgets, and it's sometimes it's very rough, almost physically to go through. And I want to say that I think that it's a mixed blessing. In some respects, we have made some processes so complex. They've been very difficult for anyone to thread through and daunted people in many respects. I mean, I've been on boards and commissions since before excellence in customer service, and then came through excellence in customer service, and now we're coming out the other side in a way. And I could see that simplification isn't a bad thing necessarily when we can do it electively, but being forced to do it is a painful process. So it's a self-evaluating process, and I think that what you've had to do, you've done as sensitively as you can. And I think what it also does is underscore the importance of the boards and commissions now, because even though the service to them might not be as significant, their contribution is even more significant now, because we will have to use more scrutiny and take more time to study rather than depend on staff for the information we need. So for that reason, I intend to work even harder. So, and regarding the stipends, I always use mine for gas and any outreach I had to do or anything like that, and it was never enough. But I understand the need to cut, so there's no objection there. And I do support the mediation process. I remember when we were using it a little bit for landscape problems with trees and views and things, and I think we only had a very few actual mediations occur. But I remember the report on it, and it was very it was a very positive report. So anyway, I feel your pain, and thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start by thanking Susan and Paul and Betty on a really good presentation, a lot of hard work. To echo what Ms. Larson said, I know it's a hard process, and I think you guys have really taken it on in earnest, and you've got a good proposal here, as painful as that may be. I'd also like to tag on to that to say that I appreciate the deadlines that you've put forth for Plant Santa Barbara getting decisions by the end of the year. It's explicit now. That's very much appreciated from my standpoint. On the issue of the mediated appeals process, I will most likely attend the Finance Committee meeting next Tuesday. I gave the city a proposal on a mediated appeals process, and I think it was either 1991 or 1989. I had forgotten about it until you brought it up today. But I'd be happy to just refresh your memory with that process. This has been a long time coming, and if it takes a major recession to get people thinking along those lines, I think it's a good way to go. I've mediated some view disputes, so I know that it's a difficult process, and you don't always get what you want, but sometimes you get what you need. But in order to do that, I think there do need to be timeframes established so that it is quick and efficient. And if there's a way to deal with a substantial issue determination on appeals, as the Coastal Commission does, to narrow down the issues and weed out the few frivolous or whatever you want to call them appeals. I'm not referring to anything that's happened over the past 5 years. But if there's a way to do that, to really bring up the important ones, to try to apply a process of collaboration as opposed to just duking it out until somebody falls down, that's going to be a better way to do it. On the fees, is there a possibility that we might explore an expedited processing framework to allow applicants or developers who have gotten approval to get through the plan check process more efficiently by retaining somebody outside of the city with the city's blessing to do larger projects so that they get through more quickly, get back on track, and we can either capture the tax increment or get the property tax improvements or what have you. I think that would work. And lastly, I notice on one of your line items, number 7, as far as the climate action plan, that $35,000 of federal funds. I think that's great. But I want to make sure that you're, again, aware that the Strategic Growth Council at the state of California is soliciting, as we speak, proposals from $100,000 to $1 million. And I think the city has a very good message to talk about in terms of getting that supplemental funding, because I think they're going to close the gate here pretty soon. So if you could at least get something in, I think it'd be worthwhile to bring in another 5 or 6 digit grant, because it certainly would help. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you. Most of what I wanted to comment on has been commented on. I'm especially interested in the reworking of the appeals process. It's a very expensive process, no doubt about it, but it is often a David and Goliath situation in Santa Barbara, where a large development entity, sometimes from out of town, with a lot of money, is going up against a neighbor who may be a retired person and part of the community in a long-standing way. So I'm wondering if there's some way to create different layers or percentages, if it's based on the size of the project or on the some kind of sliding scale for economy. And maybe other communities have it, maybe they don't, maybe it's impossible to do. But it's I think there are a number of citizens that would feel left out of the appeals process if the rate were going to go up to $2,000. And that would be a loss to the entire community. Thanks.
Ms. Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have comments on the fee for appeals. They're along the lines of Ms. Jacobs. And I know some of the appeals are trivial. I know they are costly. City staff and time and effort, the city council meetings and so on. However, there are groups that are sort of watchdog groups that bring up major issues, such as, and this is one that's not yet resolved, and it's one that is right there before us with our own EIR on the general plan update, where there seems to be a difference of opinion on whether or not an EIR must state the best option, the best alternative. And this came up with the Sandman, and I think these appeals often serve a very useful purpose, and I would not want to see the fees really raised. I would like to see the mediation made a requirement. Hopefully those would help take care of the more insignificant appeals, but I wouldn't like to see the appeal fee go up beyond, say, $500 myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would echo Commissioner Larson's comments in that in this budget process, it's sobering to see a loss of body of work and accomplishments over a period of time when times were better, and I'm glad to see that somebody's mentioned being sensible to that. A couple comments. One, obviously, I'm glad to see that none of the fee increases will be adding burdens to the fire victims, and I would encourage us to keep that philosophy. And then I think I'm a little all over the board on the comments on mediation. I would rather see little or no fee for required mediation and large and comprehensive fee for a lack of desire to go through mediation. So I think I would take the combination of my last two commissioners' comments and kind of mush them together. And I would caution that we just went through one on Milpas Street that sort of went through a mediation, sort of came to an agreement, but that mediation also required an approval by a decision-making body that had a decision different than the mediation, and kind of botched the whole mediation process up. So there's some work in that thought process of mediation to go through. But I would certainly emphatically agree with Commissioner Lodge that the structure should continue to benefit community and neighborhood organizations, and put the revenue generating responsibility on those who want to jump right into a city council appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, everybody seems to have comments on the appeal issue, and I suppose I can add to that. I don't think that the city should look toward appeals as a mechanism for generating funding, but I do think it needs to be looked at in the sense that we do need to plug the leak, because the city is spending a lot of money on appeals. So somewhere in between, I think we need to have a balance, and that's why I'd like to see, sort of a completeness or a qualification process on appeals to make sure it's at least a valid appeal, or it really has substance to it before it just automatically becomes appeal because it was filed by a certain deadline. So I think just like applicants go through a review period to make sure the application is complete, I think that the appellant should have the same onus, that the appeal is really based on something substantial. And I think there's, perhaps some of those ideas of different ways to structure the fees depending on the scale of the project that could be considered. But again, I don't think it should be a revenue generator, but we need to I think, plug the big loss that we're incurring by having it such an open and attractive process the way it is right now. Also, I liked the comment that Commissioner Jostes had. I think that having expedited fees to actually pay more to have something done quicker as a source of revenue is a good incentive-based way to go. And I'd like to see whatever we're doing for, fee generation and everything really be geared more toward incentives. If a plan check can be accomplished quicker or something else quicker, maybe there's a sliding scale on the fees. The sooner it's done, the more the city receives. So there's a mechanism there to make the city be efficient, just like private practice is. So that's something that might be worthy of consideration. Otherwise, projects tend to, I think, drag out just so everybody looks busy, even though there's not a lot to work on. So I think an incentive-based fee system might help generate revenue for the city and help with the efficiency aspect. And I like the mediation aspect that was mentioned. I think that could at least be a good initial step to take on the appeals. I'm not thrilled with the news that we knew what was coming on the stipends, especially for Planning Commission, given that we've been a separate category for years. Planning Commission has pretty much always had the stipend. The other boards and commissions were added 3 years ago. I know because I was on ABR for years, we never had commissions when we applied. We never expected them. But the workload for Planning Commission is so substantially different, I think, than the other commissions. And the fact that most of our time is during daytime hours when we have staff support. It's not like we can come in evenings and do it in our off time. It's really a sacrifice on our business lives and other lives, and it's not so much about the money, but the fact that we don't have union representation, so we take 100% hit. Doesn't quite seem appropriate. And really, it's not about the money, it's the message. And when you look at it compared to other items, I mean, just the retirement benefits for one city council member would fund the Planning Commission for 30 years. And that's if you serve on, city council for 5 years. So something's out of whack, given the amount of participation and the importance that's placed on Planning Commission. So it may not change our involvement. We're already here, but I'm more concerned, I think, about the quality of applicants that would apply for Planning Commission in the future and what that may cause. So,
I did a calculation. I forgot to mention it. The $50,000 is 8% towards the recommended budget. Just thought I'd mention.
Right, and the Planning Commission portion, I think, is about 10,000 of the 50. Right. So, anyway, just food for thought. Any other comments? Any other feedback that you think you need on this?
No, thank you
comments,
very
Beth?
much, and we'll, like I said, I'll be at the other board and commissions council on Tuesday with finance, and thank you very much for your attention and your input. This, I think it'll make it better in the end,
Well,
hopefully,
I
for
think
wherever
the
we go.
comments about efficiency, sometimes it can actually be a good thing, and we're all going through it in our own way, so let's try and make it a positive. So,
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much for a good presentation. Okay, our next item is item 4. This is the Cater Water Treatment Plant. Yes, will you be doing the presentation, Danny?
No, but I do want to give a
Oh.
little introduction.
Okay, great.
So the project before you is the ozonation project at Cater Water Treatment Plant, and you'll get a lot of details about what that is. I just wanted to say that it is a significant capital improvement project for the city, and it's being funded by stimulus money that has short timelines for approval and design. So in order to balance workload with ensuring that the project can actually get done and funded, the Public Works Department hired Pat Saley as a contract planner to serve as the case planner for the project. She's been working with me pretty closely and also Public Works staff to get this to you as soon as possible. Pat Saley, she's a planning consultant. I don't know if you know this. She used to work for the city in the 80s. She was a principal planner for the city back at that time, and she's been working on a lot of different city projects, not as a case planner, but mostly more in a facilitation mode for big projects. She made a presentation to the commission last fall for the West Beach project. Anyway, Pat Saley.
Great. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, members of the public. The Cater Advanced Treatment Project is one that is pretty interesting. Cater is obviously a industrial type use in a single family neighborhood. Let's see if there it is. This is Cater, just over 12 acres, San Roque Road here, Foothill Road. The green is other city property, parks type of property. This is Stevens Park. This is Laurel Canyon Park. The facility has been there since 1964. These two handsome gentlemen are at the groundbreaking in 64. On the left is Mayor Don McGillivray, and on the right is the infamous William B. Cater, who was a water commissioner at the time, the one with the shovel. In 1980, the plant was expanded to provide service to Montecito and Carpinteria customers, so it is a joint facility operated under a joint powers agreement. So Montecito and Carpinteria have been involved in the planning of this project. One of the most important components is that it's a gravity flow system, and that's something that was probably the primary criterion they were trying to meet in looking at alternatives. Excuse me. About 8 years ago, the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, instituted Stage 1 water regulations, and that required some changes to the plant. This is all relating to improving drinking water quality and disinfection byproducts that you'll hear about a fair amount today. There was a conditional use permit amendment. It was originally permitted through a CUP, and an amendment in 2002. And then 4 years ago, Stage 2 regulations were adopted, and these, instead of being able to average the readings on 30-some wells or testing stations throughout the city, now these Stage 2 regulations say every single one has to meet the regulations, and thus an additional process needs to be added. And the city has 2 more years to have those changes in place, constructed. One thing that's very important to the current operation of Cater is that in 2007, the Zaka fire, you recall, that was, I think, the second largest fire in California's history. It burned about 60% of Gibraltar's watershed and 20% plus or minus of Cachuma's, and that has resulted in a lot more organic matter in the water and a dewatering process. And as you saw on the site visit, those of you who are able to go, the dewatering function is currently out of doors, and they're, of the pretty much 8,000 square feet proposed, 3,400 of that is a building to enclose this existing use. So really the net addition in terms of buildings is on the order of 4,600. The site, as I mentioned, is just over 12 acres. Zone single family, A1 means minimum of 1 acre lot size. The general plan and zoning for the city of Santa Barbara neither one has a public utility zone. Some communities do, this one doesn't. So pretty much all the infrastructure, water utility type of uses are permitted through conditional use permits, and there's the catch-all category of quasi-public use in any zone. So that's the section of the code we're addressing. The existing use is a water treatment plant. The proposed use is the same, and it's just adding a process. And currently there are just over 20,000 square feet of enclosed buildings. There are other tank enclosures and such, but 20,000 feet. The surrounding area, this is pretty interesting. Here is the site. Again, Foothill Road right here, San Roque Road. The sort of peachy, I suppose, pinkish color here. This is Stevens Park. This is about 4 acres of property across the street that the Water District purchased a few years ago for a buffer and also as future expansion space. And some of the alternatives looked at putting some of the facilities over there. The mouse keeps disappearing. There it is. But leaving that in reserve is just a prudent thing to do. This, again, is Laurel Canyon Park. This is a county parcel right here, and the green is Bureau of Reclamation land, and there's the ones that administer Laurel Canyon Reservoir. The nearest residence to the, right about here is where the ozone contactor building is proposed. The nearest residence is about here, and it's over 500 feet away. And that's an important consideration when you're looking at setback modifications. There is a lot of room between the facility and adjacent residences. Kathy Taylor, who's the applicant, she's water supply manager? System manager. She'll go into more detail about the project, but it is in order to ensure compliance with the Stage 2 water regulations. The 3 buildings total 8,000 square feet. 3,400 of that is enclosing an existing use. The changes to parking are only in location, because right here in this area is where the ozone contactor is proposed, and it's displacing 5 spaces. And those will be moved to the interior and earmarked for e-vehicles, employee vehicles, et cetera. Some of the landscaping put in after the 2002 approval, some of those small oak seedlings will be relocated on site, and David Black, the landscape architect, can elaborate on that. So while there's square footage proposed to be added, there's no change to the use, no change to employees. The parking, one of the modifications relates to parking. Whenever you add a new building, you have to address the parking requirement. But again, the use isn't changing, so staff feels that's a pretty easy modification to support. You'll hear more about the site plan, and this is a little hard to read. Here again, San Roque Road, the ozone contactor is in this area, and an open tank storage enclosure. The dewatering building in this vicinity, it's now open and over here. This is an addition to the operations annex where all the chemical sorts of storage and use goes on, and there's an addition proposed. The double setbacks required because it's a non-residential use. The setback here would be 30 feet. The building is proposed at 20 feet. In this area, the double setback would be 70 feet. The standard setback is 35, and the building is proposed at 33 feet. And then there's also an open tank enclosure proposed right here outside the setback line. Oh, excuse me. On the right, it's a little hard to see. This is a photo of the parking lot area. It would be right in here where some of the displaced parking spaces are now located and where the Ozone building is proposed. On the left, this is a photo actually one of the neighbors took, kindly loaned it to us. And with the Jesucita fire in May, much of the vegetation that served to visually buffer this building from Ontaire to the west was burned, and also many of the homes there are higher, so it makes it difficult to screen that building as it was at least previously. And one of the things that we've discussed with neighbors is building color, because the building is pretty darn close to white. It's not quite, but it's close. And then on the right here, this is up near the north property line, and it's behind this fence is where the CO2 building is proposed, but in this vicinity. This is a meeting that was held earlier this month with neighbors. It was the second of two. And their issues are really the first two here, noise and aesthetics. And especially since the Jesucita fire blew through there and burned a lot of the vegetation, sort of what might have been out of sight, out of mind is now much more prominent. Enclosing the dewatering function is really going to help. Some of the design elements that the acoustical engineer suggested are being, or virtually all of them are being included in the plans, having doors face away from the neighbors, things of that nature. Aesthetics, the biggest issue is the color of the buildings, and normally the Architecture Board of Review, when they look at additions, they want all the colors to match existing, but they indicated they're amenable to introducing earth tones throughout the complex. And as a part of this project, and presumably as the buildings, just a regular maintenance schedule, are repainted. Compatibility, it is industrial type use in a residential neighborhood. The design tries hard of the new structures, tries hard to soften the visual impact. It is what it is. You can only go so far to soften that, but the Cater staff and Water Resources staff have worked quite a bit with the neighbors to try to soften that and increase compatibility. The setback modifications, 20 feet instead of 30 on the north property line, 33 feet instead of 70 along San Roque Road. ABR had a lot to say about ways to soften that, do some mounding, landscaping. So also, given the distance over 500 feet to the nearest residence, it seems that the setback modification is understandable given the circumstances. Right now along San Roque Road, existing building sits at 35 feet and the proposal is 33. Already mentioned parking. ABR on March 22nd made the findings, they're actually up on the wall here, that they felt the design was compatible and doesn't block views, and it has an appropriate amount of open space, landscaping, etc. So concluding, staff is recommending approval subject to findings and conditions, and our rationale being for the setbacks, the distance to the nearest home, that it's on three sides surrounded by public uses, not residential uses, and existing buildings have similar setbacks, and the property is well landscaped. Parking, we feel it's pretty easy to rationalize that given there's no change to use or employees. And then in terms of the conditional use permit amendment, the general plan gives virtually no guidance. The discussion of the Foothill neighborhood doesn't even mention the plan. And, you know, maybe the general plan was approved earlier in 1964. I don't know the timing, but they both happened in 1964, the plant and the general plan. The GP does talk about regional water plant, and land use element goal 2 talks about providing adequate services. So we believe it's appropriate to make the findings, approve the modifications, and approve the amendment to the conditional use permit. So we'd be happy to answer any questions now or after you hear from the applicant.
I think we'd like to hear from the applicant, and we'll hold our questions. Is the light on? Yes. There you go.
Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Taylor. As Pat said, I'm the city's water system manager. I'm here to present the Cater's advanced treatment solutions for the William B. Cater water treatment plant. And in with my presentation, you will be hearing from Todd Jesperson from KBZ Architecture, and he'll be showing you the architectural elements to the facilities we're proposing, followed by David Black. And Pat did mention that, or Danny did mention that we were getting a state revolving fund loan for this project. And we have two of our state regulators here with us today to answer any questions about that. And we have others here from the design firm, from the engineering firm to answer questions as well. My overview, I will be talking about the Cater Water Treatment Plant. It's a regional water treatment plant. The EPA prescribes the drinking water quality regulations, and the state enforces them. Kurt and Jeff over there. The disinfection byproduct rule I'll be talking about, Pat touched on that, the stage 1 and the stage 2 and our challenges with compliance. I'll be speaking about our advanced treatment investigations, what we did to look into meeting this, complying with this regulation. And we'll be talking about our proposed project, what we looked at, the treatment process, the facilities, and the landscape. Okay, this is the South Coast Water System. I think I have my laser pointer here. And Cater, as I said, is a regional facility. It's right in the center here. Gets the water from Kachuma and Gibraltar. And we treat the water for the city of Santa Barbara, as well as Montecito and Carpinteria and all places in between. The disinfection byproduct rule. We disinfect with chlorine, and when the chlorine reacts with the organics in the water, it creates disinfection byproducts, specifically trihalomethanes and halioacetic acids. I'll try not to say those two words again. So I'll call it the 60-80 rule. The stage 1 disinfection byproduct rule, which was promulgated in 1998 for compliance in 2002. I'm sure many of you have been in towns long enough to remember when we undergrounded the Sheffield Reservoir. That was in response to complying with the stage 1 disinfection byproduct rule. And as Pat touched on, it was a system-wide average, so all of our monitoring stations throughout the city, all 37, on a running annual average had to meet this 80-60 rule. The stage 2 disinfection byproduct rule was promulgated in 2006 for compliance in 2012, and it's a little more stringent. In fact, it's a lot more stringent. Every monitoring station, all 37, have to comply with the 60-80 rule. And additionally, we have had to identify 8 new monitoring locations where we know that the trihalomethanes, I said it again, and halioacetic acids are of higher than our other locations. This is a map just to show you our monitoring locations throughout our water system. The white is the city of Santa Barbara, and as you see, some of the red stars are outside in the flesh color. Our water system does extend beyond the city limits, but it just shows that we have a system-wide smattering of stations throughout. And this graph, it's just to show historic data from January 99 through January of 07 of trihalomethane concentrations for one location, Santa Barbara, one in Montecito, and one in Carpinteria. And the red line is the upcoming regulation that will be in effect in 2012. So what this is showing is historically, looking at the historic data, that we know we have a problem and we would have problems complying with this upcoming rule, so we have to do something. So the advanced treatment pilot study we started back before it was promulgated, actually in 2006, and the objectives at that time were to improve the water quality, reduce the disinfection byproduct levels to 20% less than the maximum contaminant level, and improve taste and odor, and we also wanted to come up with a regional solution. So the advanced treatment pilot study, our investigations, we looked at so many things it's really hard to say, and I would say our studies and evaluations and bench scale studies, we did this for over 2 years, I bet. We looked at different treatments we could do at the plant. We looked at bypassing Laurel Reservoir, which is across the street. We looked at putting locational treatments in our distribution systems. This would be for Montecito and Carpinteria as well. And we also looked at regional treatments. We found that the best alternative was a regional solution, and it included the ozonation, which is the primary element of this project. And the ozonation, it met all of our goals. The 5-day test for the disinfection byproducts improved the water quality and taste and odor, and we can integrate it to on-site cater. So effectively, what the ozone process does, it replaces free chlorine as a preoxidant in the treatment process. We would generate it on-site using liquid oxygen in a contained facility, which is very well alarmed. And the ozone would then be added to the raw water. Effectively, what it does is it reduces the precursors that cause the disinfection byproducts to be formed, and then also the taste and odor problems. And then it makes it more amenable to be filtered out during the treatment process. The project funding. Partners with us in this project is our Montecito Water District and the Carpinteria Valley Water Districts. Through a joint powers agreement, they are responsible for 39% of the project costs. And as I mentioned, we have a $20 million state revolving fund loan, and this loan, the terms are 2.5% for a 20-year term. The submittal deadline for the contract documents to the state, it's actually September 1st. However, working with Kurt and Jeff, they are really under the gun to give away double the amount of state revolving fund loans for this fiscal year. So they have asked if we can speed up our process and get our design documents to them by June 30th. So wanting to comply for $20 million, we're working hard.
If we could speed up this process a little, there's only about 15 minutes. I want to make sure that your consultants have time as well. So.
Okay. So then very quickly, this is the Cater Water Treatment Plan. As Pat said, the one primarily driving design element was the gravity flow. So when situating the 5 elements on sites, Pat, if you could hit the next one. The ozone facility is down here, as Pat said, and Todd Jesperson will talk about that in more detail. And it's situated here just to preserve the gravity flows throughout the plant. And then the mechanical dewatering facility over here, that's to bring our noisy temporary dewatering equipment inside, reducing the noise. And Pat touched on the annex here, the addition off of the operations annex to house the additional chemical that will be needed with this project. And these 2 elements here are tanks that will support the ozonation process. And in summary, we feel that it's the best alternative and to speed up. I think you've heard me.
Thank you very much.
And now I'm going to turn it over to Todd Jesperson to talk about the architectural elements.
Good afternoon.
Chair Bartlett, Commissioners, I'll be brief on the buildings again because they're relatively simple in nature. I'll start with the first building as it bends around San Roque here is the ozone plant. This is a freestanding building. Again, location was completely driven by that need to try and maintain the gravity flow of the system, trying to stay away from electrically driven pumps and other things that can be compromised by emergencies. You may look at the site and see the area out here, again, which is a 5 million gallon reservoir, not a nice green patch of buildable area. So we really were limited to placing the building in this location and then trying to see what we could do to minimize its impacts. As we look at the building itself, we're trying to match the architecture of the existing facilities, the ops annex and the admin building, kind of a nice colonnaded type of Spanish architecture, if you could. So what we have, again, is a building driven largely by what's inside of it. The line that you see going across here is kind of our minimum water level that we need to maintain for that gravity flow. So the building just a little bit higher to maintain that, and then bringing the other building masses down as they come closer to San Roque Road, again, trying to minimize that mass and scale as we approach the public frontage. The landscape has incorporated some berming, and the building is set a little bit into the earth itself, again, trying to minimize those heights and scales. And we see the same thing around the other side. This is San Roque Road out here, so we've been able to berm up and bring the front mass down, again, to try and make that a little bit more friendly of a building for the use that it is. The next building that we have is, no, it's okay, go ahead, that was right. Back here, the dewatering building. This process is currently taking place here, which is right at the edge of the canyon, and so they're having a lot of noise take place with skip loaders and trucks. Wanting to internalize all that in a new building in this location with automated conveyors and whatnot, and get rid of the truck and other noise as it carries across the canyon. So we can take a look at that building, again, of a similar architecture, keeping it as compact as we can with regard to the processes that happen within, but maintaining the arches and the colonnades. I'll talk a little bit about color as we get to the end of my presentation. Pat, go ahead with the next one. Again, it's a relatively compact building and with a couple of adjacent tanks that take care of the sludge as it's being taken out of the water. The last building addition is on the back of the existing Ops Annex building, as they call it. We're doing a small addition into the rear of the property onto that building that's for a new chemical process that becomes part of this new chemical process that Cater's adding. So we were just showing our addition here. Again, we're matching that existing architecture of the Ops Annex building. This is the one that's primarily visible to the neighbors across the canyon, and we'll see a little shot of that as we come up. But before we get to that, there are two other small enclosures. Here, next to the ozone building is liquid oxygen, and then we have CO2 tank here at the rear corner of the property. Again, not wanting to leave exposed tanks, we're putting small enclosures around them, trying to set them into the hillside as much as we can, but again, making them really as small as possible, just enclosing the size of the tanks and some equipment that fits around them. So again, they're very minimal structures, but again, something that is better than just an exposed tank sitting out on the back. And then this is the liquid oxygen tank a little bit. This is the one that will be closer to the corner of the property. The front door is visible, so we tried to dress that up a little bit. Again, just something a little bit beyond the strict maintenance type of building. And this photo was provided to us by a neighbor across the canyon. So you can see the existing Ops Annex building essentially here. This residence is a little bit lower. There are many more that are higher up. So you can see the opportunity for landscape screening becomes difficult as the Cater facility is right at the edge of the canyon. So any planting that's done, there isn't much room for planting there. We thought that the best way to address kind of how visible it is now is to tone down the color, really, by painting the buildings, trying to go towards a more earth tone. We reviewed this with ABR. They were very amenable to getting away from the existing colors and to going to something earth tone that in the bright sunlight, it's starting to blend much more into the hillside and not become, quite have the same visual impact. This is not, necessarily the final color. We're looking at a range of earth tones, but again, I think you can see the difference in the impact just by toning those colors down. And I will pass it along to David Black to speak more to the landscape.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Chair Bartlett, members of the Commission. In order to be brief, I think I'm going to limit my comments to the overall design objectives for the proposed landscape up at Cater. We would endeavor to utilize a low-maintenance, water-conserving native plant palette of material. We would like to complement the proposed architecture and mitigate the visual impact of the new structures, particularly as seen from the public way, particularly along San Roque Road. And lastly, provide a landscape that meets the City of Santa Barbara Fire Department's guidelines for fire protection. I would say that I've already met with Ann Marks from the Fire Department on site, and we've discussed the guidelines specifically. This plan here is the ozone facility. As you can see, the general disposition of the plant materials, tree massings and stuff are spaced out, as well as the shrub massings in order to meet the Fire Department guidelines. as far as trying to avoid continuous fuel loads across the landscape. Oh, and I should point out, too, in terms of the impact of the facilities on the existing landscape, there are some, particularly in this area. This area was planted in about 8 years ago as part of an earlier development and improvement. And so in order, the impact will be, there would be a removal of 16 non-native trees on the site throughout. There will be a total of 31 new trees, and in addition to that, we are going to be able to relocate 31 impacted existing oak trees, particularly in this site here. And what we'd be doing is transplanting them to across the road east of San Roque, as you can see there. And then as we move farther north, up, here we are. That's the site of the CO2 storage. And fortunately, the majority of the existing landscape, which is sort of the down in the lower right corner, we can preserve and protect. And whatever little impact that the tank facility has, we'll replant and address new plantings there. And then moving west to the dewatering facility, we are going to be locating some of the existing oak trees that we took from the front and relocate them along the west boundary there. And what planting we have an opportunity to do, we will do around the facility there, with consideration, obviously, for fire protection. And that would sort of limit my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other concluding comments?
Concluding is, yes, in summary, I think that we have we're presenting the best project for meeting the upcoming Stage 2 rule while also balancing the concerns of the neighborhood. And we've worked with ABR, and I hope that we get positive comments from this commission.
Great. Thank you very much. And at this point, I'd like to open public comment. I know everybody has been patiently waiting, so if any of you filled out speaker slips, please come forward. I'd like to try and keep it to 2 minutes each if we can, and agree with those that go before you if you do agree. Thank you. Speak at the microphone here. Okay. But do you want to speak at all, or give us, okay, and then give us your name, please.
Hi, my name is Marcia Elliston. I'm a neighbor. Pat Saley mentioned the meetings that took place with the neighbors. I'm one of them. I'd like to just get right to the point. The staff, both Kathy Taylor and Susan Thompson, have been very efficient and very accommodating about including the neighbors that are outside of the 300-foot mandatory noticing area, which we all are because we live on the other side of San Roque Canyon. As you could see from the pictures, there are no neighbors on the other side of San Roque Road that look at the water treatment plant. The neighbors that are in direct view, that we see this view, are on Ontario Road, Via Tusa, Ontario Hills Lane, and along there. So we are really the residential neighborhood that's being affected. As the architect said, he referred a lot to the architectural design and the landscaping that affects the neighbors and affects the public way. And when he's referring to the public way, he's referring to San Roque Road. I just want to emphasize that there are no neighbors on San Roque Road. The neighbors are on the other side of the canyon, the people that look at the back side of the water treatment plant. There has been no attention in the building of the plant or in the remodeling of the plant to design features and compatibility with the neighborhood as regards the back side of the water treatment plant. As Pat Saley mentioned, that was amplified tremendously when the fire came because it whipped through the canyon and we all lost our landscaping. All of the people there are some signatures on the letter there, which are all of the neighbors. All of those people are now very educated about what goes on at the water treatment plant, thanks to the staff there, because they have invited us over, given us tours, and we are in complete agreement with the expansion project as far as the necessity for it goes, the moving the ozone treatment, having a building for it. However, we would like to request two things: that the Planning Commission, in as far as you're capable of doing so, actually require, or if you can't require, highly urge the applicant to consider some landscaping on the back of the water treatment plant to shield it from the view of who really are the neighbors and hide some of this incompatibility between a very industrial-looking Stark building and the neighborhood. The colors that the architect showed you would go a long way toward doing that. As you know, the new buildings are 8,000 square feet of new buildings are, the Architectural Board of Review has agreed to go away from the off-white, stark white, to an earth tone color. The neighbors would like to request very earnestly that there be considered actually darker colors for the back side of the building that is set into the hillside that the neighbors look at to really make it disappear more into the landscape and into the surrounding area and make it more compatible. The colors for the front will have to match more what's existing there, but the back sides of the buildings, of the new buildings and the buildings that are already there, the sort of unusualness about our request is that we're actually asking you to do something about the buildings that already exist. Since the Jesucita fire, everything has changed in the canyon, and all of the neighbors along our side lost almost all of our landscaping. So we are all scrambling to replace our landscaping, and we would like to ask you if you could require the applicant to take some responsibility in the landscaping department for coming up with something that would help shield this very exposed industrial view from the other side of the canyon. We call that the backside, and it really truly is the backside. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Is there anybody else wishing to speak on this item? Okay, I will close public comment, bring it back to the commission for questions and then comments. Ms. Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not certain. Are some of the blind arches on the existing building on the backside, or are those all on the, perhaps the architect could. There was one slide which showed some blind arches, and I wasn't sure where they were.
Yeah, on the new building or the existing building?
I wasn't sure.
Okay, actually go forward one. Forward this way? Yes, perfect. So the existing ops annex building, I believe the arches run along these two sides, and the back sides are smooth, unrelieved walls.
Okay. Okay. Well, I realize it's something that if the existing buildings were to be need to be remodeled or redone in some way, and I don't know, have no idea what it would cost, but blind arches would certainly soften the appearance on the backside. And it definitely is a backside. I happened to go for a hike a couple of weekends ago up on Terre and then down into the canyon from below, and I was saying, oh my word, you know, because it really does hit you in the face. And I would love to see the city be able to add some landscaping on that side. The problem is that it just drops right straight off, and I don't know, Mr. Black, is there room? I know some of the eucalyptus trees are coming back to a certain extent, but is there something that could be done?
You know, some 8 years ago, we actually planted all these trees along here, many of which were burned out in the Jesucita fire. And you're right, we do have some issues around. Well, the primary issues, one is many of the houses are up higher, so the sort of view, if you will, looking down, these trees would probably have to be, you know, 50, 75, 80 feet tall to really affect any sort of screening of the building. But I know that this area in particular, after the fire, really damaged the opportunity for screening there. And so we're going to be, so this has been recently replanted since the fire, so over time I think that will come back. And then we're going to be doing some new planting here. But one of the big issues too with tall vertical trees like eucalyptus is the leaf litter, and the fact that leaf litter will get into these open pools. And so that's a big consideration when it comes to planting. Other than that, you can see we have lots of paved area, and there's not a whole lot of opportunity outside of these narrow perimeter areas to do any real planting. And as you point out, beyond the property line, the slopes just drop away. So we're just doing the best we can. That's why we felt like, you know, color might be at least a good opportunity to begin to sort of mitigate the visual impact of the backside of that building.
Mr. Chair, I have just one other suggestion on the color issue. The building has different setbacks in the back, and perhaps if there were different tones of sandstone or, colors there, it would help reduce the size of it as such a, the feeling of it as such a massive building. That's just a suggestion.
Other questions? Mr. Jostes?
I just have comments.
Okay. Okay. Ms. Jacobs?
Thank you, Chair Bartlett. In discussing the landscaping, have you considered trellises or arbors or something that can be on the side of the building? Sometimes, for example, you'll see a fake arch that has ivy in a trellis growing inside of it, and that softens the appearance of it and doesn't take any space because, along the backside you don't have space to plant very much, but some kind of plantings don't take a lot of space. They instead are vines that grow on arbors. And I know leaf litter is a consideration, but I would ask if that could be considered. It is a semi-public kind of view. People do see it when they're hiking through the public lands, and it's glaring now, and any improvement would be so welcome. I have another question. It's a lot of flat roofs. Is there any solar panel opportunities on these great expanses, or do they really need to be kept completely clean because of the operation that goes on inside?
Well, actually, there we are. Can you go to the oblique? Yes, that's fine. We are actually looking at solar panels in this area here. And then to get back to your first question about the trellis, Pat had a good picture of from I think up in here looking down on this building here, and this is full of water. This is essentially a reservoir, you can say, and we really can't have anything growing on the concrete that might deteriorate it. And additionally, the one view that Pat had of the building down here, you really can't see this wall here. This is the big eyesore. And then they have some trellis above, let's say our filter basin here, the sedimentation basin actually is what it is. Operationally, it'd be really difficult. So that we're really hoping if we can come up with some sort of color scheme.
Yeah, well, color certainly would improve it. While you're there, what happens to the old dewatering site?
The old.
I'm calling it the old one.
The old dewatering. We would we rotate our basins. So one would be like a drying basin, and then one is with a liquid sludge, and we would just rotate the three around operationally.
Okay, so it continues to have a good, useful function.
Yes.
All right, thanks.
Okay. Other questions? Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll resume my Tuesday questioning. Both of my questions have to do with the conditions, and one was on condition page 2, number 6, which has to do with noise and visual screening. And both of these, I think, were a result of the noise study that was done. But the language in the condition on this particular one and the subsequent one I would question just mentions adding wing walls as needed. And I'm wondering what prevents something more substantial in that wording than as needed, and letting us trust the city where normally if it was a private development we'd err on the other side and make it a condition if it was really seemed to be an improvement over the situation.
Well, Chair Bartlett and Commissioner Jordan, we're going to be working, our design engineer is going to be working with the noise agency who did that, the firm who did that, to see what wing walls and exactly what would work for them on that. So that is being considered.
Okay, and then the other one is back to my question that I had on Tuesday about the blowers that I didn't know anything about, and that's on page 5. And I'm sure the answer is the same, and that's on the use of the blowers inside the plant building that are powering the air delivery. And again, that would be something you'd look at versus...
Well, actually, no, that we have a better answer today for you,
Okay.
actually. So what that is our the trucks come in here, and for the chemical deliveries and to unload the chemicals, they have a compressor on the truck, and that is very loud when they are offloading the chemical. And our design engineer is looking into putting the compressor indoors, and what I didn't have the answer was where they were going to be putting it. And this is the area that houses the generator, which already has sound attenuating panels inside. And so he was looking to find an existing structure where he could fit that in, and that is where right now that is where it's going to be going.
So I could lobby for that when we get to comments, and it wouldn't hurt your feelings, right?
No, not at all.
Okay, and then I think I have a question also for staff. Being sensitive on the issue of the grant funds and the timeline, the process of when we talk about paint and paint colors, and if somebody was to pick on the back side of the building above those holding ponds there, the big white side one, that we agreed that one that could be painted. I realize the one that's to the left can't be painted because it's holding water. But does a decision like that, can it be mandated as part of this body's conditions, or is the only choice left to send it back with recommendations to ABR?
Chair Bartlett, Commissioner Jordan.
No.
Okay. I was just going to say that it's, if the commission is interested in doing that, I would say make it a condition of approval and let ABR figure out what the actual color will be. That's their job. This does have to go back to ABR for preliminary and final approval before it can get a building permit.
But does that added burden
No,
threaten the grant process and submission timeline?
I don't think so. It has to go back to ABR anyway
Okay.
as part of the process.
Okay,
So.
thank you.
Ms. Schwartz?
Thank you, Chair Bartlett. My question goes to funding and the share also that Montecito and Carpinteria Valley are contributing. Could you confirm, if I understood correctly, 39% will be borne by Montecito and Carpinteria Valley for the upgrades, the cost of the upgrades?
Chair Bartlett and Commissioner Schwartz, yes, through a joint powers agreement, Montecito and Carpinteria, they provide 39% of upgrades to the Decatur Water Treatment Plant.
And so as a loan, how will the city absorb the responsibility of the loan given these very difficult financial times?
Well, we've been planning for this project, and we have built it into our rate structure. And so we propose a rate structure. We're in the seventh year of a 10-year rate structure of increasing rates 3.5% each year. And we will be going to the Finance Committee next month, and then for council approval for the adoption of the rate increase for next year. And in the event that they would not vote for the approval of increasing rates, we would then look at other planned infrastructure improvements that we would defer.
So no money for these upgrades are coming out of what I'll call just generically existing reserves or whatever the enterprise zone?
It's been planned for in the rate increases. So
okay, so a pass through basically to the ratepayers.
Right. Yes.
Okay. All right. I'll save my comments for later. Thank you.
Any other questions? I have a quick one for staff. Can you explain the double setback as it relates to the modification request? How did the original plant get built within that setback, or is it because the plant and the ordinance were developed in the same year that maybe the plant had a head start, or?
Mr. Chairman, option 2, I think, is much more likely, that given the plant was originally constructed in 1964, things weren't quite as sophisticated as they are today. I don't know, though, when that double setback requirement was instituted.
Mr. Chair, I believe the double setback requirement was instituted way past 1964. I mean, I'm thinking it's more like the late 70s, early 80s that we got the double setback.
Okay.
So that would have.
All right, great, thank you. All right, bring it back for comments. Mr. Jostes, I know you're dying to jump in here.
Well, I am, because I think this is a really great project. I can certainly make all the findings to grant the modifications. And I think it's notable that we're using $20 million worth of state revolving loan fund here that the EPA is kind of directing through various states around the country to do exactly this kind of thing. So it's a perfect marriage, and I want to go on record expressing my appreciation to the folks from, was it Cali, PA, that are here today, or whoever's
State Department of Public Health.
State Department of Public Health Services, that it is laudable for you to light a fire under the city to try to get this project funded more quickly so you can spread those funds through a broader group of projects and actually make a big difference in water quality throughout the state. On the issue of energy conservation, I know Ms. Jacobs referred to this. I would certainly support the commission moving forward with some type of a permissive condition or a suggestive condition to urge the applicant to include photovoltaic systems on the roofs in their application, in their final ABR review, so that they get one chance to look at this and they look at it as a whole, so that if you're going to do this, whether it's in a phased manner or not, you get the permits to do it now and you can move forward as the project goes along. It's also interesting to note, being on gravity, are there opportunities for hydroelectric generation long term? And I know that's not part of this project, but I just mention it, that it would be great to see the Water Division move towards capturing more of that potential energy generation over time. If you want to speak to that issue, fine.
Actually, Chair Bartlett and Commissioner Justice, the city owns and operates a hydroelectric plant at the north end of Laurel Reservoir, and we had it operational for many years, and then for struggles with the federal government and their compliance, we decommissioned it in the early 2000s. We were looking at recommissioning that hydroelectric plant, but the crux of the issue is that right now we are on federal property, and if we have looked at a land swap or a parcel split or trying whatever we could do to get it on city property, then we would not have to engage in a license with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So that is
say no more
in process, but it's a very slow process. And at one point we did want to marry that to this project, but we realized that would have just dragged this project down. But we still are pursuing that.
Right. Great. Thank you. The last thing is the colors, and I don't know whether the commission is moving towards somebody painting a mural on one of the west walls. And I can certainly see that not slowing down this project going through the various boards and commissions. But I do think that we should encourage the applicant and ABR to consider non-traditional approaches to earth tones, because just having one color as an earth tone color, this is still going to be very, very noticeable. So whatever can be done to naturalize those west-facing expanses of walls now, whether it's some type of painting treatment or whatever you can do. I mean, I know it can be done better than it's been done traditionally. And I would want to suggest to ABR through our conditions of approval that be encouraged in this project because of the sensitivity to neighbors across the canyon, above it and below it. It just makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think gravity's grand. I'm so glad you don't have to add pumps or, so I really appreciate the location of the building. I can support any mod you need, support all the mods actually, because what you're doing by not needing to pump is a phenomenal savings in itself of energy, and it certainly would offset the any encroachment or perceived encroachment. The whole time we've been sitting here, my mind is just free floating on this wall problem, and I'm thinking anything that can create a shadow line, even screening in the form of an arch, that's not very expensive. Think of it as a movie set instead of just a building, and maybe the distance is great enough if that neighbor used a zoom lens a little bit on that wall and it really doesn't appear that close. You could probably use vertical lawn, fake lawn. They're using it everywhere. There's all kinds of things to make things green. But you got to think vertical instead of, if you're driving through the Sepulveda Pass, you see all this fake, David knows about it because I talk about it every blue moon whenever Henry's speech comes up for gun-iting the cliff. I think, why not just apply some of that fake rock they put in Sepulveda Pass, that looks so natural, but so it can be jazzed up without breaking the budget and break just to create some shadow lines but think of it as a set because that's basically what we're creating rather than a huge investment. Nobody's going to walk up and touch it, so except whoever's there. And once again, I want to thank you for a terrific tour. We don't very often have cause to go in there. I was on the ABR when we made you do the real nice gate. So glad that Richard Six was too. So it really is a nice, it's a lovely jewel for the city from the front side. Let's make it really nice for the neighbors in the back. And I think that it's just, it's really a wonderful facility and wonderfully managed. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Chair Bartlett. I agree with Mr. Jostis. This is a wonderful project, and I certainly can make the findings for it. I would like to see in our conditions, under Conditions A, design review, that the ABR be encouraged, or that we insist that the ABR create a color palette so that it's not just one color that would be spread over everything, but a color palette that might be used throughout the facility. Something easy to maintain so that as it needs to be repainted, it's not a burden, but that it could be used to differentiate the San Roque Road part, which is red tile roof and stucco and kind of has a nice scale and so on to it, versus the backside, which really does have just a monumental quality and needs to be toned way, way down, and that the palette idea would provide some variety of colors and hopefully not slow down the application process. Secondly, I would insist that we put the photovoltaics in at this point in time so that they do get approved and permitted without having to revisit it later on. You've got the space up there, why not get it designed and permitted, and as funding is available, make it happen. So it's a really nice project. Thanks.
Thank you. Others? Mr. Jordan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would concur also. In between Commissioner Jostis's and Commissioner Larson's description, I think we got the framework to go forward on how we're going to get to a color or a set. I would add just, I think, a couple personal comments, too, that I think that Condition 6 on visual screening, I think there's ample opportunity just for other people to look at that again, and in particular, it seems to me there's room along the west side of the new dewatering building for some additional type of screening or trees that block part of that building. On the north side of the new parking spaces on the back of that water cement wall there's some room for some mounding or trees that would at least obscure that portion of that wall. And I appreciate what they're doing on that far corner with the new CO2 tank. But as we were standing out there Tuesday, in fact, there's another tank that's on that concrete platform, or another pump or some piece of operation that, in fact, I think we were mentioning to ourselves, well, wow, if that popped off at 2 o'clock in the morning and I was across the canyon with the windows open, I guess I'd hear that pretty well too. And so I guess that would be another area, I think, that would be prime consideration as to whether some type of noise screening could be mounted on the side of that cement pedestal. And I had one note on the conditions page back in the construction section, and that's page 6, where there was a prior citation that if anything, some subject matter was going to happen, you were noticing both the 300-foot residents and the residents to the west. And on the holiday and after work schedule, so it's the last paragraph before you get to number 5 at the bottom, we only note that we're going to let the the 300-foot residents know. We don't note that we're also going to let the people across the valley to the west know, and I think that would be in addition to those conditions that we would agree to notify them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other comments? Ms. Schwartz?
Thank you, Chair Bartlett. I'd like to start with my appreciation to Ms. Taylor and the team. Very helpful site visit earlier this week and an excellent presentation today. And I, too, can make the findings to support items 1 through 4 in terms of the modifications and the CUP amendment that are identified on page 1 and 3 of our packets. Gee, I wish this wasn't an unfunded state mandate, Mr. Justice. I just hate to see additional financial burdens placed on our residents, on our ratepayers. But I'm supposing at this point there's no way around it. That's why I asked the financial question. We're already paying very high water rates, and at a difficult financial time for everyone, it would be certainly ideal if we didn't have to pass that through. I spoke with a few water quality specialists recently, and it sounds as though ozonation is a significant improvement for public health. So even though the regulation was placed upon us, I'm getting the sense that I don't know we would have undertaken this upgrade project on our own, but it sounds like it's a win-win in the sense that we are going to make some important improvements to the property, to the structures, allaying some of the neighbors' concerns from an aesthetic perspective, and also improve public health conditions. So I think that's excellent. In terms of the issue of the view shed and the issues of the massing, the architectural design, I'd just like to add, perhaps there's also some sort of texturizing or an appearance of texturizing that can be done on the outside to reduce the appearance of mass or this kind of monolithic or monumental look. What comes to mind, and I don't particularly care for freeway sound walls, but the new sound wall that's gone up on 101 in front of the Old Coast Highway tennis courts looks like it's texturized. It looks a little more naturalistic. I think it's even an improvement over what you see down towards past Summerland on the way to Carpinteria on the east side there. So maybe in addition to color, we can also look at some other options, and I'll leave that in your capable hands. I would also like to commend the team for really trying to internalize the noise factors. I can only imagine that it just echoes throughout that canyon and is a real annoyance or nuisance to the neighbors. So anything we can do there would be terrific. The small enclosures around the tanks, the berming, and setting them against the hillsides, just that you've really gone the extra mile, and I hear that the neighbors appreciate it, I appreciate it, and I think actually it's going to be a significant improvement to the whole area. So I'm not sure I should call it a win-win, but I think we're moving in the right direction, and I applaud you for bringing in the neighbors and hearing their concerns and really doing everything you can to try to incorporate elements to the project that will both meet the regulatory requirements as well as make the area an improvement to the community. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Lodge, any additional comments that haven't already been mentioned?
No, this is an excellent project, and I'd also like to concur with all the comments about the good job that's been done by staff and the consultants. I just want to throw in, I well understand why staff doesn't want to deal with FERC. That came up during my time in office, and yes, do what you can to get it on your own property.
Great, thank you. Well, I think everybody really looks forward to having this project happen and happen soon. It was a great field trip, a lot of good testimony. I agree with most of the comments that have been made. I was intrigued, though, by the photo that the neighbor across the canyon provided, the last one. It almost looks like the building is entirely covered in vines, and I would almost think that tallest building that's separated from the other ones that have all the water containment where you can't attach vines or leaves, but the detached tall one that we went through, perhaps you could vine cover that wall that faces west. I have my office directly adjacent to the Long's Drug, which is totally vine covered, and it really doesn't shed a lot of leaves, and it's beautiful just to see that big green wall. And perhaps there's a way of doing some vinage treatment on that one back side where you aren't adjacent to your other water facilities that might work, or perhaps even a green screen. The other thought, if since this project really is viewed from above, especially by a lot of the hikers and neighbors, that if the photovoltaics don't work on that roof because of the multitude of skylights that you have, you could perhaps incorporate a green roof as well, which helps treat the water quality, includes, adds more insulation to the building, and then it looks good from above. I mean, this project really has a fifth elevation, and that's the top view looking down on it. So not only do you have to, worry about what the neighbors see across the canyon, but there's, a lot of hikers and people above that really look down on this project. So I think whatever you can do between color palettes, materials, vinage, there's probably a kit of parts that you can use, and different pieces would apply in different locations. But I would encourage you to perhaps explore as many as you can in this proposal. It's ironic that the Zaca fire really created the need for most of these improvements, and then the Jesucita fire makes it objectionable to look at because it took out all the landscape. So well, you can't win. But anyway, I think you're on the right track, and I would look for somebody to craft a motion. I think we're all in support.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Justice.
I move the Planning Commission make the findings outlined in the staff report for the project, augmented by an addition to condition A6, that the ABR be directed to work with the applicant to develop a color palette or other non-traditional approaches that minimize visual impacts to the neighbors to the west, such as green screens, vinage, etc. And two, that a subsection be added to section A of the conditions of approval that recommends, let me see what I wrote here. Recommends to reinforce the applicant's desire to include a photovoltaic system as a part of the design review of this project. I'm trying to be flexible yet directive at the same time, so that there's an opportunity here to make an improvement and get it at least permitted, if not funded.
And I'll second that motion.
Any further comments or discussion?
Mr. Chairman, could I
Yes.
just ask for a clarification? I think what I heard the commission saying is you'd like photovoltaic or some similar energy, alternative energy system designed in, even if it's not funded immediately, but it's considered in the design of the additions. Is that correct?
That's correct, because I don't think the loan funds apply to such an improvement, and the city would have to find alternative funding for that. And I'd hate to see the condition take away funding for the real project at hand here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, all those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion carries. And this is appealable within 10 days. But hopefully not. The commission would like to take a 5-minute break. We will be back shortly. Okay, having a quorum, I'd like to reopen the Planning Commission meeting, and we are on to item number 4, or actually it's, I'm sorry, item number 5, which is the Public Works Street Capital Improvement Program, and John Wozniak will be doing the staff presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. My name is John Wozniak, Principal Civil Engineer for the Public Works Department. I'm returned here today. Been here on February 18th regarding the initial presentation on the Streets Capital Improvement Program, and we responded then that we would return to the Commission with an update prior to going to the Finance Committee and the City Council, which is scheduled for next week. So I'd like to give you an update and take any questions that you may have. So today I'd like to give you an overview and recap, and the highlight is the program funding priority categories, the basis for which we use to select and choose projects for funding, give you an update of that proposed fiscal year 11 Streets Capital Improvement Program budget, and discuss the next steps. Just a reminder from the last session that the purpose of the work session is to obtain the Planning Commission and public comments. It's in accordance with our circulation element to hold public work sessions and to incorporate the Planning Commission and City Council's input prior to setting or directing projects for funding for projects. So with this recap and overview, the bulk of the story is that there's a very limited amount of funding as compared to previous years. There's a high competition for the funding projects, and one of the things that we've been working on for the last several years is that recognition that maintenance of the existing infrastructure, the streets infrastructure within the public right-of-way, is one of our top priorities. For the last year and this year, staff has prepared a 6-year capital improvement report. Typically we do that every 2 years, but we've done it because of the difficulty of the economy and funding challenges. We've done it last year, and we have done it again this year. That lists the needs in the community with regards to capital improvement projects. And so that is a great tool to assist us in looking at the project candidates. And this year, we are going with a 1-year budget, as we did last year. The city has a 1-year budget proposed for fiscal year 11. And again, typically, we would go in 2-year budget cycles. But because of the economy and the limited funding issues, it's a 1-year budget proposed this year. We will be headed towards the Finance Committee, and that's scheduled for next week. And then ultimately, City Council will review and approve the budgets. To recap quickly, the funding sources are Measure A. Measure D sunset between our last session and this session. It sunset March 31st, and the new Measure A kicked in April 1st. And so now we're on the Measure A 30-year measure, which will bring a steady stream of revenue to the city and the county. Of that Measure A revenue, approximately $688,000 is attributed to date to the Streets Capital Program, and I might add to that number may be adjusted and is likely to even decrease if revenue projections continue to go down as what we're seeing. The utility user tax is another funding revenue source for us, and approximately $1.35 million of utility user tax is designated for the Streets Capital Program. And another funding source for the program is our grant funds, and we're projecting approximately $4 million of grant funds, but they're dedicated funds to our bridges and Safe Routes to School programs. And so with our Ortega Bridge project, we're anticipating getting approximately $2.2 million of funding. Again, there's no assurance that we'll get that, but we're on target to receive that if all the stars get in alignment on that grant funding. And then with the Proposition 42, which is our state gas tax, it's approximately $800,000 that we've plan on getting from the state. And as you well may know, that the state budget could potentially impact that. But so we're never banking on that money, but we would have historically gotten it, and we plan to incorporate that into the budgets. And we also have a $800,000 Safe Routes to School grant for the Jake Boiselle project that we're anticipating to come to fruition for the construction of that project. What's that one called? The Jake Boiselle Multipurpose Pathway. It's not on there because it's a grant-funded project, and what we've been showing to the boards and commissions are our city funds, the Measure A and UUT-funded projects. And again, the grant-funded projects are dedicated to those specific projects. So we have the discretion to use the Measure A and the utility user taxes, and that's what we'd like to get input on in those discretionary projects that we're using those funds for. So one of the key elements for us is to, about 3-4 years ago, we recognized that the money stream was the game was changing, and that the revenues were being reduced over the years. So we set up program funding priority categories. And I've listed them again. These are the same categories that I presented on the February meeting. And I had them numbered then, and that wasn't a great idea then, because we talked a little bit about, well, what's the priority of those categories? And so I've taken the numbers off because you notice that the top 4 say high priority in each of them. And depending on the type of project, it could be a higher priority in one category than the other. And so we purposely not set numbers on these priority categories because they are very important. And so we could certainly talk about that more if the commission would like to. But these are the top priority categories and the basis for us selecting projects to be funded. And I'll get into that a little bit more when I talk about individual projects. This is the spreadsheet that I did present in February, and it's actually 2 pages. This is the maintenance of infrastructure spreadsheet. You notice the total, $1.95 million for this category alone. And the second page included the infrastructure improvements, like sidewalk infill, access ramps, etc. And then we added a safety category for a total of $2.45 million. That was the projected revenue estimate in February. Now here we are 2 months later, and this is where we're at as of April 6th when I sent you this information for this meeting. And as we speak, these numbers are actually declining due to projected revenue estimates. And so the difference between the first list and the second list is that we have eliminated 8 projects from the list. As mentioned in February, we had a number, because the money was thin, we had a multitude of projects between even the $25,000 to $100,000 range, which we were hoping to fund. But because the difference between those 2 amounts is approximately $400,000, we simply cannot afford some of those projects that we had desired. And we took some of those comments from the Planning Commission and from the Transportation Circulation Committee. I also went to the TCC the week after the Planning Commission in February, and they asked a lot of very good questions, and we responded. And taking the input from both the Planning Commission and the TCC, and from the public and from staff, the better information that we've gathered in the last 2 months, we've actually eliminated some of these projects from the list, and the reasons are different. For example, the Coda Street Bridge, we're hoping to have some match money for the Highway Program Bridge grant funds, of which we get 88.5% grant funds with an 11.5% city match. And so we need to bank some monies over the years to be able to get the city match for the construction of some of these bridge grant projects. And so what this means is that we'll simply have to bank some more money later. That's what that means. Or find alternate funding revenue sources. Ortega Bridge, we were fortunate to have actually a cost savings from the Haley de la Vina Bridge that we were able to transfer over from one bridge to another, so that's why this was dropped. Laguna Pump Station repairs, this was some initial design money to kick off some design work for the Laguna Pump Station, which has got over $1 million need of repair in the future, and so we're going to defer that just a little bit longer. Sidewalk infill. Here's one project where we would love to be able to put more new sidewalk in there, but because of our criteria, which we're saying maintain infrastructure before building new, in concert with our criteria, we're not planning to build more until we have enough money to maintain new. Cliff Drive at Las Positas, that's primarily a grant fund project, but it is only the grant fund is only for construction, and we're finding some existing funds, again, moving some money around to cover the staff costs associated with the design. The staff is leading the design work on that project at this time. And that project isn't scheduled for construction until 2013. So we still have a couple years to talk about that project. So just so you know that that's not coming to construction in the next year or two. The Pedestrian Refuge Island Program and the Traffic Safety Education Program, those are two new programs that we would like to initiate. But again, it really comes down to with $400,000 cutback between 2 months. And we just simply are going to incorporate safety features into all the projects that we can afford to build. And so we've historically done that. We were hoping to do some additional safety embellishments if we could afford it, but we're simply, this is going to be deferred. This idea or programs are going to be deferred at this time. And then similarly with the match funds, we'll find an alternate way to match grant funds if we have the opportunity to get grant funds. We'll look for city matches as best we can. So we did need to make some cuts or changes, and that included reductions and a couple increases where we've made some adjustments where we felt it was necessary. An example of that is our drainage system maintenance increased by $25,000 from $75,000 to $100,000, and we've had two corrugated metal pipe failures, one on Modoc Road a few months ago that cost us $80-some thousand that we didn't anticipate, and we needed to do that before a sinkhole developed in Modoc Road. It was one of those emergency purchase orders that we sometimes have to do. So we need to replenish the funds for those types of work and storm drainage maintenance type work. Bridge preventative maintenance increased by $25,000. We do need to get, again, maintaining our infrastructure. We thought we needed some additional funds there. A couple reductions. And then pavement maintenance has been generally the catch-all at the end. What's the money left over for pavement maintenance is sometimes the way some people have looked at it. Historically, over the years, we have had we budgeted approximately $2.2 million over the last 5 years of city funds for pavement maintenance. This year, we're only at $1 million. And so the reason that we're budgeting less, or one of the reasons we're budgeting less, is we have less money. And secondly, we were fortunate to get some Recovery Act funds to the tune of $2.7 million this fiscal year, which is going on the roads as we speak. We have 2 construction contracts for a total of $2.7 million going in the streets. And so that helps us since our city funds are short for the Streets Capital Program. So the net difference of all the changes has been approximately $400,000. And I had a note on the pavement one on the left, which is anticipate that's going to be reduced. From the information that I've received this week, there's a likelihood that these numbers will be changed downward for the Finance Committee and the council meetings upcoming. So with the next steps, April 27th, next week is the Finance Committee budget meeting where the Public Works Department will be taking our Public Works budget, and the Streets Capital will be a component of that Public Works budget presentation. And then we're scheduled for a council budget review on April 29th. And then there'll be, I'm sure, follow-up budget meetings. And it is at the end of June where council will be adopting a balanced budget, as is the case annually. So with that, in summary, significant reductions in the projected revenues for the Streets Capital Program. Last year, our fiscal year 10 Streets Capital budget was approximately $3.3 million. Fiscal year 9, I recall, is about $4.1 million. So you can see that we're headed to a level likely under $2 million for this year. So again, our projects that are recommended to be funded adhere to our program prioritization criteria. And we've tried to take all the comments from both the Planning Commission and the Transportation Committee and with the management and the Public Works staff. And that is our proposed budget, which will be adjusted in tune with revenue projections over the next weeks to come. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions. We have Drew Van Hengel here, the Transportation Supervisor, in case you have any direct transportation questions.
Great, thank you, John. Appreciate your being brief. Ms. Lodge, do you want to make any comments before you head out, or?
Very quick question. The bridge maintenance amount went up significantly from 50 to 75,000. Is that because bridges are not going to be replaced? That there's more money for maintenance?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Lodge, the bridge maintenance item is a separate item from our capital bridge replacement projects like the Coda or Cabrillo or Ortega Bridge. There are approximately 60 bridges in the city, and not all of them are eligible for grant funding for bridge replacement in the federal program. And so we have done an inventory of all of our bridges, of their needs, and we are proactively doing some maintenance on each of those bridges where we're unable to get some grant funding. So that's a new program that we've initiated, and it's in concert with knowing what we have and knowing what we need to maintain bridges. And so we have a consultant do a study, and that study revealed the necessary improvements. And so we plan on initiating the plan for bridge maintenance, and that'll include some deck work or structural tune-ups, etc. So we just thought that we would, and they've been prioritized, and so we've looked at that list and thought that we need to put some more money into our pedestrian and lower traffic bridges as well to keep them in good shape. So that's the logic behind that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Others? Ms. Schwartz.
Thank you, Chair Bartlett. I have two questions. Mr. Owasiak, where within your presentation today does the new stoplight at Figaro and De La Vina exist? And if you could provide the status on that, that'd be helpful.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Schwartz, we've been fortunate to receive some grant funds on another intersection project, being the Carrillo at Anacapa intersection. And so when we did receive those grant funds, that freed up some money for another intersection. So those freed up funds will be used at the De La Vina intersection that you mentioned. And so that project will begin its design this year, I believe, Drew. And Drew can give us an update of that project.
Thank you, Chair and Commission Member Schwartz. The De La Vina Figueroa project is currently in preliminary concept development, which means that we have a consultant working with the statistics we have for the intersection regarding volume and safety to develop 3 concepts preliminarily that will go through a public vetting process through the Transportation and Circulation Committee. And once that preferred alternative has been chosen, we'll go into final design on that project. And we're hoping to get to TCC in May or June.
Oh, of this year, okay. I thought for some reason it may have been delayed until 2011, no, okay. My other question is, and pardon me if the rest of the commission may know this, in terms of federal appropriations and where we might have potential opportunities to draw down on federal monies, I know that the 2011 appropriations have already been secured, and I spoke with Congresswoman Capp's office about this recently. But I'm wondering, when can we get in the pipeline to discuss 2012, even though the city right now is looking just at 2011? Can we be a little more, forward-thinking and move ahead of that so that we can get involved with our elected officials in Washington at a point where we can communicate in a timely way and lobby for our anticipated needs?
Mr. Chair and Committee Member Schwartz, Commissioner Schwartz, the city does have a lobbyist in Washington. We have a contract with a lobbyist there for the last several years, so we are working on longer range projects in addition to any current projects. So an example of that would be that we're asking for funding for the Cottage Hospital access improvements off of 101. So there are projects that we've identified that we have a lobbyist on the payroll to help us with.
Okay. Other comments? Mr. Jordan?
Actually, I just have a question, and I'm sure I confused this when we saw this earlier. So I go back to this exhibit that was part of the original staff packet for today, and that's your program funding priority categories. And I probably confused the question several months ago, but it's clear to me now that everything you have on this page, at least for purposes of this page, are equally important. Would that be correct?
Generally speaking, that is correct.
Okay.
Generally speaking, that is correct, although I have to admit that the way that we have funded them is that we have taken things that have the most significant consequences if we don't fund them. You know, for an example of that was the pavement maintenance. You know,
I understand there's some considerations there. So going back to our prior meeting, I guess what I was interested in when I talked about a ranking was obviously in between then and now, when you've had budget consequences, funding consequences, you have had some type of ranking. For instance, you have decided that pavement maintenance was more valuable to fund at a greater level than sidewalk infill, and sidewalk infill has fallen off the list. What I was curious was more of a transparency in your list being ranked individually, high to low, as best you could, just for a matter of my personal education or public disclosure, so that I would have known that sidewalk infill was certainly less important than pavement maintenance, so that was more the issue of my question on ranking, was to try and get a feel on this list what was less important, what was more important. So I'll ask that question better the next time around, I guess.
No problem. In response to that, when I did put up this slide, I actually purposely put the improvement project as the last one on the slide to reflect that yes, the sidewalk infill project, that was one where, again, in concert with the other category or prioritization, is that we're going to try and fund maintenance first and ahead of improvements. But thank you for the question, because it gives us more food for thought for future as to that we can maybe reformat that for the future.
Others? Ms. Jacobs?
Thank you, Chair Bartlett. I also was sad to see sidewalk infill dropped because it makes sense to maintain what we have before we build something new. No discussion there. But the sidewalk infill program is so important to the city's entire kind of circulation and how we can get people to have an easy time walking and to connect up sidewalks that seem so close but just don't quite meet. And so I hope that makes a return to the priority list if there is funding available for it. And I think I speak for all the commissioners when I want to express thanks to the voters for approving Measure A so that we have the money that we do to maintain the streets and improve the stoplights and traffic lights and bridges. It's great. Thank you.
Mr. Justice, any comments?
No further comments.
Okay. I have a question and a couple comments. First of all, I was surprised when I read the staff report, that we went from 19 projects down to 11, and then when I compared the two budgets, the shorter list of projects actually cost more money than the longer list did. So I was trying to understand the sort of the economic message that was being sent. Because the capital improvement budget had been $1,875,000, and then at least in the packet it went up to $1,889,000, and then now you've dropped it down a little bit with what you gave us today. But it just was, the numbers were going opposite of what I was expecting to see.
Mr. Chair, from some of the comments that were received, mainly at the Transportation Circulation Committee, there was a lot of questions asked about introducing new programs like the Refuge Island and Safety Education Program at these funding levels. And so when these programs were decided, when the decision was made to, that freed up a significant amount of money, which then got dispersed to the remaining projects. And I think that was the answer to why those other numbers grew, is when we didn't want to create programs that, because next year, the following year, I'm not sure what that looks like, and we were concerned that we didn't want to initiate a new program like the state has done, and that you can't fund the next year.
Okay.
or
And
be
I-
challenging.
and
So
then
anyway, that's part of the solution.
Okay. And then I had a question more on a look-ahead basis. What is on the horizon for replacement of the old Cacique Bridge that has been washed out for years? Now that the 101 improvement plan is creating the new Cacique undercrossing, which would link up perfectly to Eucalyptus Hill, which is really the new access to that whole side of town now that Sycamore Canyon is closed. I mean, that one seems like that would be an obvious one to really help the circulation on that whole lower east side. And is that on the horizon, or what's the status with that?
Mr. Chair, it's a very good question, and the Sycamore Creek watershed is getting a lot of attention at this time. It started with the 101, Caltrans 101 bridge widening for conveyance there. The city has initiated a project just upstream to that to increase the channel conveyance, and we're applying for grant funding to start the bridge widening upstream of that location. And so the Punta Gorda, Indio Muerto, and Cacique bridges are all part of that game plan as to increase the conveyance of Sycamore Creek. So there's quite a bit of activity there, and we're proactively looking for grant funds. And just recently we may have found an avenue for some grant funds there. So we'll continually look at that watershed with the T fire and even the other Hececita fire. It burned a significant amount of the watershed above Sycamore Creek, and so we're proactively looking at ways to address the drainage conveyance of Sycamore Creek, and so we are considering your bridge in question.
Well, to follow up on Commissioner Jordan's comment about transparency in terms of the ranking system, it seems like to replace a bridge that has been washed out would be of a higher priority than replacing one such as Mason Street that is already there. It seems to be working. Sure, there's probably something wrong with it, but at least it's still there.
Mr. Chair, we'll certainly look at those issues, and while there may be an existing bridge, I recall one of them, I think it's in Indio Muerto, that has actually a column in the middle that actually is a tree and log collector that, even though a bridge is there, it's probably contributing to impeding flow through there. So we're looking at all the issues associated with that watershed, and we'll certainly prioritize the money as it becomes available.
Okay, great. Do you need any other comments from us?
Mr. Chair, I was just looking for any additional comments that you may have with the list that's been before you and the prioritization criteria, and I appreciate all the comments that I've received.
Well, like I said earlier, you should have gotten it approved 2 months ago when you had more money, but go quick.
That's true.
Thank you. With that, we'll go to our administrative agenda. It looks like our staff hearing officer update might get delayed with Ms. Larson's absence, so we'll do that next time. We can move on to the committee and liaison reports. Anybody have anything to report other than myself? Okay, I had a busy week last week and this week. Last Thursday, I was invited by Mayor Schneider to attend the SB-CAG meeting, which was regarding the circulation improvements associated with the studies that have been done for Cottage Hospital and how it affects freeway access. And evidently that has not been moving forward because the project initiation documents had not been signed by SB-CAG in order to get Caltrans going on a project study report. So there was a lot of debate, and in the end it was a close vote. The SB-CAG board voted 7-5 to sign the document and move it forward with for the project study report, most of which is being funded by Cottage Hospital as part of their mitigation measures for their project. So hopefully it's now in Caltrans' hands. And I think the real sticking point in getting unanimous support was there was a feeling that it would be competing with other highway funds that might go toward widening, which is really not the case, but I think there was that perception. But at least now it's been approved. It's moving forward for the study report with Caltrans, and hopefully we will be getting some updates as it proceeds through the process. Also Monday I attended the ABR meeting. There were 3 or 4 projects that really related to the commission, but I think the most important ones, the Los Portales Affordable Housing Project, across from Casa de la Raza, had an in-progress review, and they actually were really pleased with the most recent round of revisions. I know it squeaked by with a preliminary approval in its last review with a 4-3 vote, but now everybody's on board with it, and there were a lot of good improvements. So that one, I think, should move pretty quickly from here. And it was mostly related to pedestrian circulation and light and ventilation into the courtyard, so it really got better in that regard. The other one that took quite a bit of time was the BevMo project at State and Delavina. And I think the real point of contention there was that it got preliminary approval at the last ABR presentation with the absence of any input on the Upper State Street design guidelines that had been implemented. So there was a memo put out by the city of listed 12 deficiencies in that preliminary approval that needed to be addressed by the ABR. And I think they were able to really boil it down to the core issues, which were how is the pedestrian access to the building being accomplished so that it really has a State Street presence, and how are the display windows that front on State Street, what does that present to the passerby on the sidewalk? So the board was pretty split on that, and they didn't give it a final approval, and they're continuing it to improve the pedestrian access from the street to the entry, and they're even suggesting still looking at an alternate entry location that is not diagonally facing more to the rear of the project, but at least to the side or partially to State Street. And it has to be a high-quality pedestrian experience. And then the applicant did discuss their business plan in terms of the display windows, and evidently they sell a lot of high-end, cut glass, goblets and other things that they're going to be displaying. So actually it'll have a nice street presence, but they actually mandated that when the project does come back that they have a storefront window designation on how many panes of glass would be opaque versus clear and which ones are set up for display. So there's some regulation as it moves forward, because we've seen the unfortunate consequence on other projects where all the windows just get blanked out and you end up with a project that faces the back parking lot. So anyway, it was a long meeting, but I think it did create some benefit. It's just, unfortunate that review didn't happen when it was going for preliminary. So their hands were somewhat tied in trying to unravel what had already been done. But, if there's a lesson to be learned, maybe the agendas or something, since there's not necessarily a lot of staff support or staff reports that go with ABR projects or other design review projects, maybe there should be at least a flag on the description of the project as to which guidelines really apply, so that people are aware of that. And I was a bit surprised because two of the ABR members actually were on the subcommittee that created the Upper State Street design guidelines. But other than that, everything went well. So yes, Ms. Jacobs.
It's what you point out is going to take some getting used to, because I think that while we had members on that Upper State Street Design Committee making the guidelines, talking about what would be the ideal for that specific spot, and yet when it came to the decision-making time, they completely ignored all that work. Or not, I'm presuming, but somehow the connection was not made that those guidelines apply to this project. And I've been saying it for years, the staff reports or lack thereof really have a unfortunate fallout when it comes to projects like this one, where we've got very clear design guidelines, really easy to understand, and yet the board doesn't apply them, or for some reason is not yet in the habit of applying them. And yet when a staff report is done, 12 key issues come up that were completely left off the table and out of the discussion just because nobody thought of it. And staff reports are so essential, and I know we don't have enough people to make them all the time, but I want to thank, I guess it was Jaime Lemon and Heather Baker who made that staff report, and it was excellent. We were sent copies of it, and I'm sure you read it too. It was an excellent staff report, and I would encourage the ABR to just keep following that and not say, well, we were halfway to approval and let's just go with that. No, no, no. Go back and look at it and really take care of that part of Upper State Street. So much years have been put into those design guidelines. And I want to thank Chair Bartlett and also our liaison, Stella Larson, who brought this to our attention so that the staff could get the extra nudge to make the report and see how that all kind of came full cycle. So,
Well,
thank you for
even though it wasn't a project destined to come to the commission,
exactly
a
the
lot
point
of
of having guidelines.
a lot of us were involved with the design guidelines, and it's important.
Yeah, but that's exactly the role of the guidelines, that if it's not going to come to the Planning Commission and get that broader review, all the more reason that the guidelines need to be closely reviewed. Yeah.
Right.
So important.
Okay. Anything else to report? With that,
You'll prod me into one more, just to. And it's off on a tangent a little, but prior to January, the Planning Commission did review the ordinance as part of the planning process on the aggressive panhandling problem downtown. I was fortunate enough to participate as one of the planning members this last Tuesday in the launch of one of the subsequent steps in that issue, the larger issue of homelessness and panhandling, and that's a program that's dubbed Real Change, Not Spare Change, and you can get information on that at www.real, R-E-A-L, Mr. Justice, change.sb.org. But what that involves is an involvement of business groups, faith-based groups. The RDA's played a role in it. The downtown organization is taking the lead, and it is a education and outreach program to stop the cycle of giving to panhandlers and watching that compassion lead to destructive behavior, but rather redirecting that giving to service programs and outreach programs that will begin to help those negative behaviors. And it should go a long way towards solving some of the issues we see with people's perceptions on coming downtown, on doing things downtown, on getting out and about, some of the perceptions that business people have in what's going on downtown and their ability to make a living, and just in terms of letting the community be a community again, hopefully. So happy to report that that's up and about, and one of the many, many, many steps being used to address that bigger issue, and I hope you all will take part in learning a little bit about that and passing the word along.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, quick question.
You said it's an outreach program. Is it flyers, posters?
There are. And so the downtown organization is the point person for that. There's actually flyers for windows. There are little donation boxes that businesses are beginning to put in their businesses. There's a set of cards that we're working with the tourism industry to hand out to the guests so that the foreign visitors in particular who come to Santa Barbara know it's an issue and know that there's a way to constructively address the issue rather than just continue the cycle. There will be print media on both city channels and regular television. There will be some radio ads, and the first year received some funding from RDA, and then it's like everything else. We'll see what happens after that and how it will keep going.
Great. Thank you. Okay, with that, the Planning Commission meeting is adjourned.
It's through.